a creepy encounter you'll never forget. An Uber driver pulled off route in a random part of town saying there was a really nice restaurant down there. I was pretty and he was taking me to dinner. It was midnight. I had no idea where we were. I just started yelling that my husband was at home and he would call the police if I wasn't there in 5 minutes. The driver continued arguing with me for a bit and eventually turned around and went back. Was driving in the same area with a friend a few days later, asked him where the restaurant was. It was an industrial area. There was no restaurant. When I was a teenager, I was staying at a friend's place about 2 hours away from where I lived at the time. I lived with my mom and younger sister then, and my mom had mental health and drug issues and would sometimes disappear out of nowhere. When she was good, she was the best mom, but when she wasn't, she just dropped the ball entirely. Anyway, I get a call from my sister, who was about 8, telling me mom had gone out that afternoon and hadn't come home and wasn't answering her phone. By this time, it was about 7 p.m. and she was freaking out. I left my friend's place straight away, got a train to the nearest station, only to discover there were no buses running at the time out anywhere near where I lived, which was about 30 to 40 minute drive from the station. So I started walking as fast as I could, but it would take me hours. So even though I knew it was risky, I started hitchhiking home. I was a 15-year-old boy, so I knew as a guy most people wouldn't pick me up, but I hoped, because I was fairly young and unthreatening, that someone would pick me up and take me the least part of the way home. I had to get home to my sister. After about an hour of walking, a car pulled over and a friendly-looking middle-aged man offered me a lift most of the way home. It had just started to rain, and I was so relieved I was finally almost home that I just jumped straight in. After only maybe 5 minutes of small talk, the ride took a very creepy turn. I'd mentioned that I was desperate to get home to my little sister, who was home alone, and after I said that, something about his whole demeanor changed. He started asking me really specific questions about how often we were home alone and exactly where we lived. Then he started rubbing his crotch. I had to get out of this car and make sure he had no idea exactly where we lived. I don't remember what I said to him after that, but as soon as we pulled up to the next set of traffic lights, I opened the car door and ran off into the rain. I was still about half an hour away from home on foot, and it took me longer because I tried to stay off the roads in case he was looking for me. By the time I got home, it was almost 10 p.m. I was a soaking wet, nervous mess, and my sister was hysterical. For weeks afterwards, I was super cautious whenever I was walking home and didn't hitchhike ever again. My friend and I went on this trip to Europe with a bunch of other teens as a choir, and we traveled to 5 countries in the span of 2 weeks. When we went to Venice, I was wrapped up in all of the sights and sounds, and my friend kept pulling me in and out of stores. I'd found out later that she was doing that because this guy kept following us for about half the day until we finally lost him. I worked on my situational awareness a lot after that. We were about 16 when this happened. There was this time that I was riding my bike back home from school. I heard a car approaching me and I moved over to let them pass. This old man was looking at me through the window and started to slow down. He rolled down the window a bit and drove off. A few days later, I see the same car following me up to where I lived. Told my parents this and we called the police. Around the time of my son's first birthday, my wife, Japanese, and I decided to take the little one back to Japan to visit with the grandparents for a lengthy stay. Well, to be accurate, I was only able to stay for about 2 weeks and then had to return to the US because my job wouldn't allow me the entire summer off. But the wife and kiddo got to stay for a couple of months at the in-laws' home. So we head back to Japan for the first time in a couple of years, but with the 1-year-old in tow. So things are different, very different. Not only are we lugging all of our usual gear, but now we've got the car seat, his stuff, the bag with nappies, and everything else you pack when you're a new parent. We get him back to Japan and back to her parents' home with relatively little trouble, but that's really when the trouble began. Anyone who's ever traveled to Asia from the US will have interesting stories to tell about jet lag, and this time was no different. In the US, we live in the desert, but in Japan it's the rainy season. In the US, we've got this big old memory foam mattress that costs a small fortune, but in Japan, we're sleeping on paper-thin futon atop tatami flooring. In the US, we've got this nice air-conditioned room to sleep in when it gets too hot, but in Japan, the wife's folk have a traditional home in Osaka, so not only is it wet, it's warm, like fever dream warm, all the time. Did I mention there's a 1-year-old in the picture? Yeah, no one slept, not even a chance. He was just as hot and bothered as everyone else, but he also had the proclivity of waking up every hour on the hour to be changed. Those 2 weeks passed like a sweaty, miserable dream, albeit with great food, and before I knew it, I was back on the next flight home. As the plane got closer and closer to the US side, it occurred to me that for the first time ever, I might not have to readjust because I had never adjusted in the first place. It was basically 2 weeks of total and utter relentless anyway. I lug all my crap home and up the 3 flights of stairs, straight dizzy with exhaustion. Once everything's inside, I lock the door, locate the couch, and drop dead with sleep. I slept like I've never slept before. My head hit the pillow that 9 p.m. Friday night, and I didn't wake a single time until 3 p.m. the next day. I'm feeling rested but drained, anemic. I clearly slept well, but I'm all puffy, messed up, but in a good way, I suppose. I keep it light for day 1 back because I'm due in the office Monday morning. I take the auto feeder off of the plants, unpack, and do the laundry. I have 1 small meal, shower, and before I knew it, it was time for bed again already. Night 2, as many of you travelers already know, is quite different. I lay there in the darkness, watching the lights of the cars passing by dance on the ceilings and walls. Keep in mind that I'm on the couch again. I don't know why, but it's just easier to sleep there when I'm alone. Maybe it's because the backrest is like sleeping next to another person. So, I'm watching the lights, thinking about work on Monday, and thinking about the trip. I don't remember if minutes or hours had passed, likely the latter, but I snap out of sleep to the sound of my son crying. As with most parents, it's a reflex. I'm up. Okay, I'm up. My body snaps vertical. I carefully shuffle around the shadows of furniture in the home, trying to avoid breaking another toe. When I reach the door to our room, my son's cries growing louder. As I push the door to our room slowly open, the ether of sleep has faded enough for reality to sink in. They're not here. They're in Japan. There I stood in the open doorway to my bedroom, peering into the absolute darkness, with the sound of a child crying so loud that I swear the glass in the windows might shatter. My blood didn't just run cold. My heart damn near stopped. Do I turn on the light and reveal the source of the crying? It may sound like my son, but there's no way it could be him. So what the fuck is making that noise? It's so intense. Fearful that my heart would literally stop if I allowed that sound to grow any louder in the darkness, I stumbled for the light and clicked it over to the on position. Nothing happens. Darkness remains. The crying continues. Horrified, I let out a sound I've never since heard myself emit. As I opened my eyes and stopped screaming, I'm standing in the bedroom now with the lights on, dripping in sweat, and somehow freezing cold. I look around the room and see nothing. No son, no wife. But I can still hear the crying. It's fading now, but it's coming from the corner of the room where there's a pile of blankets. I move towards the pile of blankets, and as I approach it, I hear my son's crying voice 3 more times. I get to the blankets piled up in the corner and pull them back. The crying has stopped. There's nothing there. Of course there's nothing there. Why would there be? But where did the cries come from? They were there. I heard them. It's 4 o'clock Sunday morning, and I couldn't even stay in my own home. I was so shaken. I strapped on my running shoes and went for a 5K around the bend. When I finished and approached home, all I had to do was take one glance at the bedroom window, conspicuously reflecting the soft light of dawn, and suddenly felt the compulsion to go for another round. 10K later, and I built enough strength and courage to go back home. I just shrugged it off to a side effect of new parent plus no sleep for 2 weeks, plus stress of international travel equals pure insanity. I was around 5, and I went outside with my sister and my mother, and just 3 minutes from when we left, there was a man just blocking the pavement and staring at me and my sister. He asked, "Can I take care of your children, please, especially the blue-eyed one?" This is not exactly what he said, but roughly, since I don't remember. Since I have blue eyes, I was very freaked out. My mother said no, and we took another route. I now use this argument against my sister, saying he wanted me over my sister because I'm better. We were having trouble with the internet going out, and a technician showed up to repair it. The router is in my parents' bedroom, and my mom showed him where it was, and then she went back into her office. My dad then goes into the bedroom, and the repairman was holding a pair of my mom's panties to his face and masturbating with another pair. My dad beat the man so bad they had to take him out in an ambulance. My dad was charged with attempted murder, but the charge was dropped a short time later. The police found 5 of my mom's thongs in the guy's pocket and a sex toy. I think the guy got what he deserved, and I think my dad is a fucking hero for beating his ass like he did. As a kid, living in a city I won't name for privacy reasons, I had a couple bizarre incidents with guys that I'm now pretty sure were predators. The place is locally famous for the absurd amount of registered sex offenders that live there. Last I checked, the city was nearing 200, and we're not talking about a big city either. It's actually sufficiently small that I've wondered how the hell it's even considered a city. In any case, the reputation scared the shit out of my parents, and my mom sat me down at the ripe old age of maybe 8 or 9 to point out faces to watch for in the paper. She gave me all the standard tips. Don't talk to strangers, tell us immediately if someone touches you, if someone grabs you, scream and fight relentlessly, etc. That scared the shit out of me, but it served the purpose of keeping me on my toes and probably saved my ass twice. The first incident was a relatively minor, but it fucked me up for about the year or so after it happened. I got off the bus in broad daylight and went across the street to my apartment. I saw a dude on the sidewalk that I thought I recognized from the paper my mom had shown me, so I was watching him. As I crossed, he stared at me, and when I got closer, he pointed at me. It might sound crazy, but it was an incredibly creepy way of pointing at me. He had his arm outstretched at shoulder height, pointing with one finger, and he pointed for a weird long time, following me with his finger for a second or two as I walked. I started to panic and went into my apartment building as quickly as possible. The guy followed, and I ran up the stairs and inside as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if he was about to snatch me in daylight with witnesses, but I saw him once or twice in the weeks following, and I was terrified of him. For about a year after that, I slept on the opposite end of my bed, because the head end was against the window. I was terrified that this guy would break the window one night and drag me out of it. We lived on the 2nd floor, but I reasoned that ladders exist. After a while, nothing came of it, and I stopped seeing the guy on the street, so fear went away. It's been years, and I couldn't give an exact time frame, but the second incident happened a few months later during the same summer. I was leaving a store, and a guy was sitting outside it with a couple of friends. He offered me candy, and I stopped and didn't say anything for a few seconds. My parents kept walking and didn't realize I'd stopped, but they were less than 15 feet away. I declined the candy after a moment, and the guy got mad at me. He fucking grabbed me, spun me around, and shoved the damn piece of candy in my mouth, then shoved me away. I tried to make a noise of scream, I think, but it's a bit hard to do with something being shoved into your mouth, and the whole thing happened so fast I could barely react. I sprinted to catch up to my parents, who somehow had not noticed, and for some reason didn't say shit about it. Brought it up days later, and my parents were fucking furious that I didn't tell them right after it happened, so that something could have been done. All in all, I'm fine. I was lucky, but I still think about it sometimes, and I still avoid that city whenever possible. Work at a convenience store, and had a regular customer scare the hell out of me last summer when COVID was really taking off. Guy was in almost every day, usually bought a 6-pack of beer and a pack of smokes on the way home from work, I guess. Was kind of scary appearance-wise, on the bigger side, bald with a few scars and a birthmark big enough that you could see it even with his mask on. Pretty sure he was military or ex-military since he wore army shirts a lot. Otherwise, he was very quiet and polite, would always say hello, please, and thank you for everything, but very rarely made small chat. Never made me feel uncomfortable in the store though, even though he usually came in alone when I was the only one on shift. Except one night, he came in just absolutely steaming. I've heard the phrase murder in his eyes, but I don't think I've ever actually seen someone I could describe that way until this guy. He looked ready to kill. He didn't say a word, didn't make eye contact, and for the first time, he wasn't wearing a mask. It was store policy not to let in customers without a mask, but the way this dude looked, I didn't say anything. Comes up to the counter, drops down a 24-pack, and for the first time I see that his hands are absolutely shredded. Knuckles split open and bleeding, cuts all over his wrists and forearms. He had a split lip and some bruises on his face too. Dude asks for smokes, pays, and goes out the door angry enough that he almost took it off the hinges. I thought about calling the cops because it seriously looked like he must have just beaten someone to death, but I ended up not. Guy ended up coming in a handful of times after that like nothing happened, then about a month later just disappeared. Haven't seen him since then. When I was a small kid, maybe 7 or 8, I went grocery shopping with my aunt. She was busy with all the shopping while I stood beside her observing the market. Suddenly, a strong jerk on my arm made me turn around and found myself getting pulled by an old man. He repeatedly said, "Want to go in a taxi?" And I just remember crying and shaking my head no. I pulled my arm from his grab and he walked as if nothing happened. The creepy part was no one did anything, or from my memory, it was as if no one saw what happened, even my own aunt, who was right there a few inches away from me. I didn't say a word to her because I was shook and scared at my wit's end. I regularly saw the man sitting in front of what I believe was his house, looking around the bustling market. He never looked at me. It was as if it never happened. He talked normally with other people, even some of my school friends whenever we were going home. I maintained my distance though. Sometimes it feels like a fever dream and question myself if it really happened. I was almost kidnapped or sex trafficked when I was at the mall. I was probably 13 or 14 years old and had gone to Books A Million with my mom shopping elsewhere, and a guy walked up to me and started telling me that he was a headhunter and thought that I could be a famous actress. I was kind of intrigued, so I listened to him. He started talking about all of the famous people he had helped with their career. Honestly, being young and stupid, I was enamored. He asked me to come out to his car with him so that he could show me his portfolio, and I told him that I wasn't allowed to leave the store. He tried to convince me that it would only take a few minutes, but I told him that the parking lot was pretty far away and my mom would be here any minute. My phone rang and I answered. It was my mom, who was on her way to get me. The guy waited for me to get off the phone and said he'd be back, but it was likely he just left. I had no idea about sex trafficking at that age, but I was unintentionally cagey about the interaction because I didn't like talking to people in general. I think my mom also calling at the right time helped to scare him off, but if I'd gone out to his car with him, I'd probably have been taken for sure. That specific mall is right next to an interstate. Worked at a supermarket as a cashier, and a woman came through my line with an opened package of chicken and said, "Don't worry, I did that and I still want it." I made note of it and let the manager know in case she tried to come back or anything. 5 minutes later, a couple comes through my line, and they're completely disgusted and talking loudly about a woman who'd been walking through the store. Of course, I'm nosy, but usually customers like that spill it to you, and they did. They said a woman was eating raw chicken from the packaging in the store, hence the opened package, and I damn near dropped. Manager overheard because I just warned them about that she'd purchased it, and sure enough, it was on the security camera. I couldn't forget her either, because her eyes were bulging out and just bright blue, just creepy looking. I ended up seeing her on the train about 6 or 7 years later. What are real-life instances of still working booby traps that have been set off at historical sites that may have killed or seriously injured archaeologists or their workers? There was an Egyptian tomb where a corridor went downhill by about 60 feet and then uphill again. The engineers put dead animals and fresh plants, etc. in there before they sealed it up, and so the decline or depression filled with CO2. It stayed like that for centuries. In modern times, when they unearthed the tomb, they found human skeletons centuries younger than the tomb where people had died trying to get in. I saw a YouTube video many years ago that I haven't been able to find since, and the details are murky, but I remember the gist of it was that there was a tunnel system under a German city that the Nazis used to stash some of their gold, allegedly. It was mentioned that these tunnels were likely booby-trapped, and the German government didn't want archaeologists messing with a site that was likely wired with bombs in an actual city. I've tried to find it again, but all that comes up is the Nazi gold train craze that wound up yielding nothing. Kind of the opposite of what you're asking, but a major problem in nuclear disposal is how to convince people 10,000 years from now that this super fancy, highly fortified structure isn't the tomb of some great emperor or a temple to the god of the underworld. It's sealing away incredibly dangerous and extremely potent dark magic that will kill any who enter and contaminate the air, water, and land for millennia if it escapes, and have those warnings be not only understood, but also taken seriously and not brushed off as superstition or a bluff. I was never able to confirm this, but a cultural anthropology professor I was taught by in college used to be a field specialist on sites in Central America. He was a larger-than-life kind of dude who lived life to the fullest. You'll see why. He told us a story how when walking into what could be best described as a catacomb, he got sprayed with a fine dust after he stepped on a pressure plate. Luckily, his student and other workers got him before he suffocated. Turns out it was a type of embalming powder that can coat your lungs if you breathe it in. A year or so later at a different site, he and all of his team caught a form of malaria that was persistent and would lay dormant after he would get treatment. The malaria would end up coming back and killing him a year after I finished college. He made archaeology and anthropology friggin' fun. Edit. He was told that the malaria, being chronic and persistent, meant that when he got older, the more likely that it would be life-threatening. He would get sick every 3 years or so and would get sicker every time. Knowing that he could frankly count the years until his death gave him a very interesting outlook. I've heard a theory that King Tut's tomb and the curse associated with it, sudden mysterious deaths of initial archaeologists soon after inspecting the tomb, may have been some form of toxic microdust that was laid across and throughout the entire tomb, and when the seal was broken and airflow kicked up the dust, it was inhaled and wreaked havoc on people who came into contact with it. Again, I have zero evidence to back this up. It is something I heard theorized, but also don't underestimate the Egyptians for being able to create such a substance. Howard Carter, discoverer of Tutankhamun's tomb, was accompanied by Lord Carnarvon, who was dead a few weeks after the discovery. He allegedly was hit by a waft of fetid air when he broke the seal and opened the door to the tombs. We also have possibly George Gould, who dies a short while after entering the tomb. Later, we discovered Aspergillus fumigatus, a pathogenic fungi, had colonized the tomb. Fungal spores and yeast can survive for centuries in a dormant state. We have cultured yeasts, same group as fungi, from bottles of Roman wine recovered from the Mediterranean in 2,000-year-old ampules, and yeast from bakeries in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians may not have known germ theory, but observationally, they may have observed the impact of this fungi on people and deliberately seeded the tomb. This would not be as flashy as a bowl rolling down a slope, but if the curse of the pharaohs was a biological weapon, word would soon get out around that if you open the tomb, you die. Quite a discouragement. There is a toxic powder in some Egyptian tombs called hematite powder. It's very sharp and can kill you if you breathe in a lot of it. It also is very irritating to the skin. Keep in mind that most tombs have been raided loads of times before the archaeologists found them. Back in Egyptian times, there were parts of their society that would loot tombs shortly after they were constructed. There were sliding walls that would drop into place and seal off a tomb. This was not a trap though. It was one of the ways they constructed the pyramid. You need access to the tomb while you build it, but you don't want people to access it easily. So they would sometimes have a seal that was a granite slab, finish burying the pharaoh, and then seal the slab. Or just tell everybody the tomb was sealed and then rob it to your heart's delight. Apparently that was super common. Physical traps don't work after thousands of years. All the physical traps you see in movies are only in movies. Oh, my time to shine. I run a daily trivia game where I angrily text my friends random questions every day. We've been running for like a year and a half. We did this one below on booby traps. 10, 12, 20, daily log. You have a store of riches, or perhaps a secret most dreadful. It must be protected at all costs. How? Booby traps. The dangerous, hidden, secretive, silly name devices have deterred many a doe-eyed fool who valued riches more than his own skin. Which of the following is not an actual booby trap? A. Mechanical crossbows and rivers of liquid mercury protected the Terracotta Army, a massive series of sculptures depicting the armies of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Spicy. B. Ivan Vasilievich, the first Tsar of Russia, was a tyrant nicknamed Ivan the Terrible. A ruthless leader, it was wise to fear him in both life and death. In his mausoleum, his death mask was painted with a highly poisonous red cinnabar paint, and toxic hematite dust was sprinkled everywhere. C. The Baja 1000, a Mexican off-road race, is among the most prestigious off-road races in the world. It covers roughly 1,000 miles of dangerous desert. It is plagued by spectators who set dangerous traps for the drivers, including hidden poles, jump ramps, and hidden caches of rocks. D. The bamboo pit viper was weaponized by the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War. Snake traps were known as three-step traps because you only had time to take 3 steps before the venom killed you. In the tunnel complexes, they stuffed the irritated snake into the hollow bamboo framework, meaning that any US tunnel rats were in for a nasty surprise. As an archaeologist, I can tell you every site is a booby trap when you account for how drunk students get on a field school. On a more serious note, The biggest dangers to our health are injuries from improper footing, falling material, bad control of tools, and sometimes vehicles. More tangibly, it's disease from biting insects. Some locations, wildlife is a factor. The only potentially dangerous stuff to dig up that I've ever encountered myself or known people who have is disease from preserved biological remains and unexploded ordnance from past conflict. I mean, on the one site I worked on, I was the only one with any familiarity with firearms and explosives, so everyone freaked out over nothing every time they found something, and I just went ahead and disposed of it. For where that site was and how heavily the area was bombed, I'm sure the only reason there wasn't anything major left was because the farmers had cleared it out in the plowing. There's this story of two hoarder brothers, we'll call them J and K because I can't remember their names, who lived in an apartment together. J was disabled and fully dependent on K for having basic needs met. Because of the sheer amount of stuff they had everywhere, the place was basically booby-trapped. They may have placed some traps intentionally, but I don't remember exactly. They were also very reclusive and seldom left or allowed anyone in. Someone in their building called for a wellness check for one reason or another, and they found the decomposing bodies of both brothers in their apartment. K had been killed by one of the booby traps, and as a result, J died several days later. Edit. It also took days to get to the bodies due to the traps, as someone added. I can't imagine how utterly terrifying it would have been to be J. Your brother dies, and then you're just stuck, knowing death is inevitable. The pain and fear he must have gone through in his final days must have been horrific. I don't know how I want to die, but I know how I don't want to die. Okay, probably not what you were expecting, but as a modern archaeologist working CRM, Cultural Resource Management in West Virginia or Kentucky border, the crew I was working for was doing a cultural analysis on a proposed coal mining area. In order to get there, we had to pass through some protected forestry areas. While walking in single file, luckily, we went from seemingly pastoral area into a heavily forested area, trekking along what was assumed to be an animal path to get into the targeted area for analysis. The lead archaeologist had his arms at an angle across his face due to spiderwebs and small branches, had a fish hook on a fishing line stuck into his arm at approximately eye height. This trap was set along the path we were all taking, and as we stopped to assess the situation, we started to notice that this was not a singular occurrence. We found 7 other examples of fishing hook traps left along the path. The lead archaeologist halted us and with great reluctance had us go off path and tried to find a way forward. Not understanding who would try to leave animal traps so high off the ground, after slowly and carefully making our way towards the targeted area for 500 meters or so, we entered a clearing area in the forest that was cultivated for cannabis growth. Upon finding the clearing, we stopped and figured it was time to GTFO the area and notify the local police. After carefully backtracking, and I mean 3 times the time to get out there, checking every step of the way, we finally got to an area we felt safe enough and had coverage enough to call the police. We waited 45 minutes after calling the local police to arrive. During that time, we called our boss and our contact at DNR, state level Department of Natural Resources, and have 3 of the 6 total police force show up. Instead of the expected helpful, "We'll take care of this if y'all tell us where the pot's at," we get read the riot act of trespassing and "what the fuck are y'all doing on private land," except we were not on private land, and tried to explain that we were hired by the coal company to do a cultural resource analysis on an area just north of where we located the pot farm. We showed them our contracts, GPS data, and survey maps to prove we were not doing anything nefarious after 50 minutes of being intimidated and humiliated by trying to explain we were doing nothing wrong, but was just trying to do our civic duty and report the potential lethal traps we had located to our survey area. During this time, the project leader had called our big boss, the DNR agent, and the state police, while the 9 of us were alternatively being harassed and intimidated. Our boss showed up with state police to our area an hour and 45 minutes after the local police showed up. During that time, we had one of our crew get a gun drawn on them and handcuffed and placed on the ground, and the rest of us intimidated in similar fashion. Once the state police showed up, we figured it would get better, as we had long figured these local cops were part of the group protecting the pot field we had stumbled into. All the state police did was separate us from the local police and proceed to intimidate us to leave well enough alone and be glad nothing else happened. So we left. project not accomplished until 2.5 years later. During that 2.5 years, there was a sweep of reforms in the area due to the cornbread mafia, look it up, who had local police and politicians on their payrolls. Sorry, my first post, usually I lurk. I'm inebriated and old, and I figured might as well regale one of my many archaeology stories. My background is rather convoluted. I'm British. I studied medieval history to A level, trained as a locksmith. The last year it was legal to practice non-destructive entry, lockpicking, moved to Munich as a historical beer tour guide and Second World War guide, both there and in Dachau. Went to uni to study history and philosophy of science with Russian history and literature. First and only year this course was available, one of two who took it, and both of us withdrew early in second year. It was impossible to complete. More contact hours than any other course and was running all over campus. Went on to train under my uncles as a structural carpenter. I'm now 33 and still an avid amateur historian and general fuckwit. The following is a non-cited but pretty damn accurate spiel. The use of booby traps is far more common than you would think. There are examples that extend back over 5,000 years. The most common is the use of water diversion. Dating back to the Babylonians and Hittites, there are examples of cantilevered stone walkways that open outlets that would flood a chamber when depressed or triggered. They have been negated due to rivers naturally being diverted due to erosion, etc. Drop falls were pretty prevalent, but again, the sheer passage of time have gunked up the mechanisms, or the pits have been filled by the slow ingress of sand or soil. There are examples of large stones designed to fall on invaders, but much akin to wall bows, where bolts fire from wall apertures. The potential energy stores, whether a crossbow-like strap of tendon or such like, the passage of time has denuated them past use. It is admittedly meager, understanding that the most advanced of these traps were developed in South America and Egypt, including sand traps. Nasty. They use weight displacement to allow sand to flood and fucking drown in sand. Serious. Subway workers, tunnel rats, and explorers of Reddit. What's your scariest unexplained true story of the underground? There's an abandoned and boarded up World War II fort in the southern part of Belgium that we often sneak into with the scouts. Getting in there requires scaling a sheer wall, where we placed anchoring points for ropes and climbing gear next to a relatively busy road, so you're being super quiet, making no light and cowering every time a car passes by so he doesn't spot you in his lights. The atmosphere is set. The moment you enter it, it's like diving into water. Sound stops, and the entire place is at a constant 14 degrees Celsius, with a slight breeze passing through. The tunnel is barely large enough for me, slightly broader than the average person, to pass without turning in my body sideways. The tunnel is just high enough to work up a decent gait while hunched over. If someone ahead of you blocks a passage for a moment, the breeze stops, and it feels like the entire tunnel network takes a breath. Because of the way the tunnels are constructed, they echo in such a way that your own footsteps seem to be coming from behind you. They also seem to take one more step than you do when you stop. Of course, we don't allow the guys and gals to take any source of light in there, so it's pretty scary overall. So I'm in there, posted at a side passage to ensure everyone takes the same path and doesn't get lost. I go in first before any of the climbers arrive, so they don't know there are friendly faces in there to help them. I'm in there for a while, just waiting for the first to come by, when I see a dancing little light coming down the long hallway. I quietly settle back in my nook and wait for whoever was smart enough to hide some matches and take them away. The light quietly bobs closer when I realize there aren't any footsteps accompanying it. I poke my head around the corner just in time to see it disappear. I hear no footsteps still. I settle back and wait some more when I realize I do hear some scuffling, very faint, breathing noises, but still very faint. I become aware of a wet heat coming from right in front of me with a faint smell of person, sweat, or dirt. Suddenly I realize there's someone there right in front of me, inches from my face. The breathing stops suddenly. Whatever it is aware of me as well. Whatever or whoever it is, we're both holding our breath, both acutely aware of each other. It takes ages. I'm sitting there unable to move, speak, or breathe properly. The wet heat passes, and some minutes later, I become aware of a very faint light coming from my right side, which soon dissipates and leaves. Sometime later still, I hear the familiar stomping of combat boots coming down the hallway from my left. I stop the person, tell them to keep following the passageway and take the first right they come to. Out of curiosity, I asked who went in first. No one. He went in first. Recently, I was visiting New York City and stayed in a hotel inside the city. It was a fairly nice place, but it was also a pretty old building that was not built with the intention of it getting so much use. For example, there were only 2 tiny elevators available for guests, and the hotel was at least 15 to 20 floors. The wait for elevators took so long that I decided I'd use the stairs. For some reason, there were 4 to 5 stairwells in the building, accessible from each floor, and most wound up in different parts of the lobby. I remembered using one of them the day before, and I thought it was stairwell D, so I took it. After descending for a while, I passed level 2. The next exit wasn't marked, but I thought it had to be level 1. I went through the exit door and found myself in an unfamiliar hallway with a very low ceiling. It could only have been about 7 feet, and sparse lighting. It wasn't eerie, but it definitely didn't look like it was intended for guests. Still a little curious, I decided to check it out and see if I could find the lobby. I walked for a minute down a long hallway with a kind of dirty stone floor and some industrial double doors. There didn't seem to be anyone around, and it was pretty quiet. I rounded a corner, and to my immediate right was this big window set into the wall. Through it was a clean white room that reminded me a little of my high school's cafeteria. I remember thinking that, but I'm not sure exactly why. There was also a man, sitting and looking at his phone. He must have been about 5 feet away from me, and only the window separated us. He saw me and looked a little startled. I waved and was about to ask where the lobby was, but he quickly pointed for me to turn back. Neither of us ever said a word. It was just the weirdest experience being in such a silent, dirty place and then seeing a modern room with a person. I speed walked out and took the elevator. In retrospect, I probably just stumbled into some storage area under the lobby. It definitely wasn't the same level, but it was the strangest discovery, and I'd like to imagine what could have gone on down there and why I wasn't allowed to be there. Explored an abandoned factory? I think I'm not sure what it was. Extremely sketchy. In the middle of the floor, there was a square cutout and just a dark room below it with no light source, around 8 to 10 foot drop. Would have been fucked if someone fell down. Also, many children toys and random musty books. Tons of bat and pigeon shit, and it went up about 4 to 5 stories. Stairs were very sketchy. Worst part about it, it was the decapitated animals there, but oh well. Not me, and not a subway, but it was under. Dad worked in the military in a submarine during the Gulf War. He used to send me pics of him in the engine room, which was a really cramped space and often leaky or greasy due to the machines. He said cabin fever gets to a lot of the new recruits. He did tell me on days they surface him, and a few select crew can go up and fish, which was pretty cool. Too bad he only did 2 tours of this. Where I grew up, there was a few storm drains that all went to the same pond. My friend A and I were messing around in the woods near one of the openings, and we could hear this really sharp echoing cry that made us both nervous. We thought it was the wind at first, and then A threw a rock into the opening and it stopped for a minute. So at this point we figured it must be something alive. We climbed back out of the woods and went to the next pipe and could hear it there too. Now I'm scared, and A is trying to prove how he's not afraid of anything, and so we go to the next one. This one is quieter, so we go back in the other direction. Now I'm being a baby because it's raining a little and I'm not supposed to get my clothes wet. I was around 9, so I'm begging A to go home. As he stops to assure me we are safe, we hear this horrible, deep, wailing noise and I start to panic. I can feel my pulse in my neck and I'm sweating, and A puts his face into the opening for the drain. The noise happens again, and A takes off down the hill and into the pipe opening. I'm now crying because A abandoned me in the rain and there's a monster in the pipes. A starts yelling my name and I have to put my face to the opening to hear him. So now I'm really crying, and he tells me to call the fire department, so I run to the nearest neighbor and tell them to. I explain I don't know why we need to call, but that A is in the pipe outside their house. They get all snotty because A is the heaviest kid in the neighborhood, so they assume he got stuck. They call the non-emergency number and a truck comes to remove the cover. Turns out A recognized the sound of an angry cat and ran into the pipe. It was a mama cat and her kittens, but the kittens were stuck beneath the wire grate inside the drain, so the rain was drowning them and they were crying. Thanks to A, they got all but one kitten out and the mama cat in time before the rain got worse. He got to keep one of the kittens, and no one believed us even though we were both there and there were firemen. No one believed he could fit into the pipe. As a teen, I was into urban exploration. There was an old ice plant near my house that had burned, I know, ironic, around 25 to 30 years prior. Anyway, it wasn't really underground, but was so overgrown that it felt more or less like it. I go climbing around over and under mangled concrete and rebar and graffiti for a while, and finally decide I'm done. A couple of days later, I hear about how the police pulled a corpse out of there. Pretty sure I walked right by it and didn't even notice. There's a sewer system under my old neighborhood, and I would go in there to smoke weed with my buddies. We started to notice messages left on the walls in red paint, like, "We're watching you. Smoke the reefer, meet the reaper." One day, while we were down there, we heard a couple of voices laughing, and were getting closer and closer. We panicked and lifted a manhole right above that opened up to a busy road street. We never went back down again. I was in a house that the police confiscated from a biker gang. My job was to assess the damage for an insurance company. The walls were all painted white, and the floor was sheets of plywood painted dark red. I was going around measuring each room, opening doors, no problem. I then opened the linen closet, and it had deep scratch marks on the inside and dents on the back of the door, like someone was trying to escape. The freaky part was straight ahead at head level was a round red splatter pattern on the back wall that had been painted over with a coat of white paint. Freaked me the fuck out, like someone was trapped in there and then someone opened the door and shot them in the head. I feel like I should contribute. Walking along the track one evening doing an inspection. It was in a station, kinda crowded and lots of people watching me work because people are naturally nosy, especially when someone is walking on the tracks that their train is coming on. So, I'm walking along and I see a rat run across the track about 10 feet in front of me. I know a rat's in the area. Now I know to not be startled when I see it again in a minute. I keep walking and go to step over a pile of garbage, see the first rat out of the corner of my eye, plus a bonus dead rat in the garbage pile. As I'm stepping over the garbage, though what I thought was a dead rat ran in between my feet and scared the fuck out of me. This story isn't what you're looking for in terms of scary or creepy, but it fucking hate rats. There used to be an abandoned rubber factory on the edge of my town before it was torn down a couple of years back. I went there once and tried all the doors, but they were barred. But I did find a crack in the concrete wall around the back that was just big enough to slip through. The inside was really neat. There were abandoned boats that must have been in storage for decades there, a bunch of old conveyor belts and factory equipment, all kinds of drug paraphernalia. I found a random painting of Jesus in a makeshift shrine, but that's not the creepy part. I was walking around this abandoned factory at about 8 p.m. just after dark. I look around for an hour or so, and aside from some old shit, there's really nothing out of the ordinary. Then I hear music start playing, something sort of bluesy somewhere in the factory. I'm not easily scared, and I kind of wanted to figure out what sort of freak was listening to old records in an abandoned factory, because that's something I would do. I track down the noise after about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's in this room in the basement that has the doorway covered with a tarp. I go inside, and the room is a huge contrast from the rest of the dingy, dull old factory. The walls were bright purple, and the room was warm like there was a space heater in it, whereas the rest of the factory was freezing. There's a cassette player on the floor playing a song, which I later tracked down to be called Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, but I never found out what the other songs were, and a bunch of papers taped to the walls that all say, "She gotta run, she gotta run, she gotta run." If I were to guess, there were at least 100 sheets that said the exact same phrase, just plastered on the walls and laying on the floor. There was a chair that looked like it had been detached from a school desk in the corner, and a statue of an animal that was really badly chipped and burned, like someone was trying to destroy it. There was also a stack of VHS tapes that had the names of women on the sides. I only remember seeing Jessica on multiple, but there were a few other names. I left shortly after because I got worried whoever owned all this shit would come back and find me there, and I figured they were in the building with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it for a few weeks. I was convinced it was either a serial killer or some guy with a porn collection that he couldn't risk having at home, or something worse on the tapes, and went back with a friend. But when we got there, they had already started demolishing the place and it was inaccessible. I'll always wonder what was on those tapes, but part of me is glad I don't know. When exploring with a bunch of friends at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, while this is not underground in its entirety, portions of it are. The buildings were left with hospital equipment, beds, books, patient files, literally everything. It's eerie, as if a zombie apocalypse occurred and everyone left. It operated from 1864 to 1994. The facility was self-sustaining, i.e., the patients farmed the land and had all resources on campus. The years this was open, a lot of horror stories came out of this place. This wasn't the modern-day psychiatric ward, more like a prison, where families paid a lot of money to hide their mentally ill or the state put undesirables. There's an underground network that was heavily blocked off with chains. However, the main buildings were easily accessible, but the access ways to the underground were blocked off inside as well. Every time we got near one of the underground tunnel systems, we could hear faint music playing. Sounded like a music box playing. We found a bent wire gate and attempted to file in. The music got louder and we were all pretty freaked out. We were all promptly arrested before attempting to go into the tunnels. There's a lot of speculation about the tunnel still to this day. The new owner said he was afraid of asbestos and was fearing for our safety. He was very grim. He agreed to drop charges if we never went back. We obliged happily. Still, I sometimes think of my interactions there, all of the remnants left behind, and get severely creeped out. I was walking through the woods with some of my friends at about midnight, having fun and messing around. It was pretty much pitch black in some areas, usually taking about a minute to get to the next light section, and at some point I felt somebody hold my hand. It was very clearly a small and definitely female hand. After about a minute, we finally got close to the light again, and I asked if she was all right, only to look over and notice that everybody else was about 2 meters behind me, and the only female was at the very back of the group. Almost immediately, I felt the pressure leave my hand. I never brought it up with them because they'd probably just tell me I was imagining things. God damn it, I know it's late, but I'll put my shit in with the rest of the pile. It wasn't really exploring, but one time the librarian at my old high school, literally old because the place was about 100 years old, asked me and 2 other friends if we could stack some boxes at the library attic so they wouldn't be a fire hazard. We went up and it was a treasure trove of cool stuff like rare antique books and 100-year-old newspapers. I thought it was really cool. Also, even though the library is only 1 floor, there was a rumor that it had a basement level where they kept all the rare antique books. I never asked her if it was true because I ended up getting on her bad side a while later. A friend and I used to work at a university in a building that was large and located in a city. The street level floor was actually labeled as the 4th floor. The floors below that had light from interior courtyards. The elevators and stairs all stopped at 1, but there was clearly a level below that could be seen from one of the interior courtyards. One day, we slipped through the window into the basement. As we suspected, none of the equipment seemed to be in use anymore, but it was cool old stuff. As we're looking around, we find a stairway down, so down we go to another floor that seemed to hold supports for the giant machines above, plus some large storage areas for coal. As we're looking around, we find what looks like a large tool shed standing in the middle of the floor. We don't want to damage anything, but we're intensely curious, so we managed to very carefully pry away a nailed board to see the top of a spiral staircase going down. At this point, we're 5 stories underground, and by design, nobody else knows that we're here, so we carry on. We slip through the hole in the wall and start to climb down a rickety old metal stairway. I'm in the back, but my friend in the lead immediately and calmly says, "Back up, now." In the shed, he explains that the bottom of the stairs seem to be completely rusted away. There's a hallway filled with water, and it's not clear how deep the water in the hallway is. It could be a few inches or a few feet. I wanted to take a look, so I went down the stairs. Sure enough, it's as he described, with 2 additional details: an old Bell System hard hat floating upside down in the water below the staircase. After a few seconds, a wake in the water heading toward me. At that point, it was up now. The wake could have been a wave caused by us moving around or a rat swimming in the water, but it wasn't exactly a time when we wanted to discover the local wildlife. We waited at the top of the stairs for a few minutes just to see if anything appeared, but it all went silent. We decided that the tunnel would remain unexplored. A little late to the party, but here's my story. There's an abandoned insane asylum in Northville, Michigan that my friends and I explored 3 times. This is the story of the third and final time we ever broke in. I still get chills every time I remember this night. The first 2 times we went, the asylum was actually more interesting than creepy to explore. Both times we happened to run into very friendly people there. The first time we ran into another group of high school kids, scared the shit out of them at first. The second time we met a couple of stoner Vietnam vets that gave us a tour of the place. It's an entire complex, complete with underground tunnels, morgue, and lots of files and things from the 50s. This time, however, we were alone and only had 2 flashlights between 3 people. Much like the guy with the story about the World War II base, the echoing footsteps sound like they're coming from behind you and always seem to take one more step after you stop. So, after exploring much of the asylum like this and being considerably creeped out already, we decide to head to the main building. It's about 18 stories tall, and the view from the top is pretty cool because it's by far the tallest building anywhere remotely close, and you can see Detroit from up there. Anyway, we're nearing the top of this seemingly endless stair corridor when the girl that's with us freezes and whispers for us to stop. "I heard footsteps," she whispers. I tried to tell her it was just our footsteps echoing, but when both of them made me shut up and listen, I could hear it clear as day. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from the top floor. Now, the building is tall but very small area-wise, so we were very close to the sounds. Still standing on the stairs, we whisper amongst us about what we're going to do. My very stupid friend insists that it's probably just another friendly person and we should go up and say hi. I try to explain to him that you don't want to meet the kind of people that pace the top floor of an old asylum in the middle of the night. We couldn't convince him, and he goes to head up the stairs, but I was like, fuck this, and just started running down the stairs. Fortunately, he followed us, and we got out of there without ever finding out who or what was walking around up there that night. To top it all off, a cop passing by on the road spotted us coming out of the building, and we had to run into the asylum complex to get away. I still think back to that night sometimes and wonder who was up there. There were definitely no guards, so it was probably either a gang, there's gang graffiti all over the asylum for the guppies, or the tortured soul of a crazy person. Either way, that was way too close. TLDR, heard footsteps coming from the top floor of a long-abandoned insane asylum about 50 feet away from us and noped right out. Went with my family to a used bookstore in Utah, like a real legit used bookstore with a vault for priceless manuscripts. Anyway, there were stairs down to a basement floor with more of the old non-fiction stuff and record books and stuff like that. The creepy part was that half of the basement floor was unlit, so me and my brother are snooping around the bottom floor and we find an open door over on the unlit half of the floor. It's just bright enough to see some empty shelves on the opposite wall through the door. We poke our heads in, and it is so dark we can't see either end of the room. It looks like an endless hallway. Some distance away, we see a blinking red light, and we nope the hell out of there and dash back upstairs. It was probably a security camera or a fire alarm or some shit, but it was still scary because I get the feeling it only started blinking once we poked our heads in. What is the scariest thing that has happened to you in or near the woods? I'll start. When I was 13 to 14 years old, I was invited to a birthday party of a close friend of mine down the street. There were a dozen of us, or something around that, as he had invited close personal friends and a couple of classmates inside his basement living room, alternating turns on who gets to play Super Smash Melee on the GameCube. As the hours passed, the sweaty gaming by a dozen or so sweaty young teenagers was slowly but surely increasing the temperature of the room, as there was only a single window that was poorly circulating the air inside. We decided to head out for a quick breather to cool down and let the air in the room renew. This story takes place in Norway, a country not particularly known for its high criminality rates and psycho murders, besides the 2011 shootings that happened many years after I was done being a sweaty teenager. So, parents tend to be quite fine with letting children and teenagers out into the dark for short periods of time. This is where the woods get relevant. Behind the house, there was a forest. Now, forests aren't particularly rare at all, And besides stories of trolls and monsters, there wasn't all that much to be afraid of. The house and the forest were separated by a road, a single streetlight illuminating the pavement or sidewalk closest to the house. We were all gathered outside the back of the house getting some fresh air as one of us spots two reflective lights looking sort of like eyes. After 5 minutes of back and forth, speculating as to what it might be and daring each other to go investigate, I rationally thought that it most likely was glass or something of the sort, simply reflecting the dimly lit streetlight. I walked away from the group, making my way toward the two eyes. 30 or something yards or meters away, I came to the source and realized it was simply a sheet of clear plastic, picked it up, turned around and announced what it was. That's when something happened. My friends started yelling loudly. Some started running toward the house. As the sheep of a teenager I was, and in my bewildered situation, I ran toward them as I didn't want to be left behind. I got into the hallway of the house, where all of the others had gathered, as well as my friends' parents, and saw that some of the others were crying. Unclear as to what just happened, I, of course, asked what was going on. What had disturbed everyone so much to the point of tears, something the teenage males are not particularly fond of doing in front of other male friends. Heaving for breath, the birthday kid told me that in the instance where I had turned around, a man, presumably in his mid-40s according to some of the others, had suddenly appeared behind me with his arms reached out in a choking hold. According to the ones that were the last to run back indoors, who witnessed when I started to run, he had been inches away by the time I started sprinting back. The police weren't called as well, this group of teenagers claiming to have seen a man presumably ready to choke me at 2200 on a Saturday night, and nothing actually happened. However, I do think back and wonder, was I about to be kidnapped? Was he simply going to strangle me to death in front of my friends? Or was it merely an act of collective imagination getting out of hand after having previously been spooked by reflective plastic? Apologies for length. Hiking at Waterton National Park in Canada. Parked the car and hiked a good 45 minutes or so up one particular trail. This trail had some neat 10 to 15 foot waterfalls, and even if the water flow wasn't high, these were the trail sites. They were nice. We passed families or couples being cute together along the way. Me and my companion decided we'd have a quick break, smoke some weed, and see what the rest of the trail has to offer before turning back to the car. What started as a trail wide enough that 5 people could stand shoulder to shoulder easily, it had narrowed down to a foot trail maybe 6 to 8 inches wide that you could only just walk single file up. About a foot or so to the left was a 10-foot drop into the river. A foot to my right was an unclimbable incline with thick vegetation. We were coming around a bend in the trail, had about 40 feet of straight path before it disappeared around another bend. It was at that exact moment that 2 adolescent black bears rounded the bend down the path that led. The bear had looked right at us. In what felt like an eternity, but was likely 5 to 10 seconds, we slowly started backing away, and I gave the greatest war cry that would put Grom Hellscream from the Warcraft universe to shame. It did basically nothing. The lead bear kept looking but stopped moving. Its partner walked into its butt and gave both a little startle. They were focused on each other as we disappeared around the bend, staring at the bears as we did. A few steps backwards, later after losing line of sight, and it was 5 minutes of running as light-footed as possible before we saw another human. We never saw the mama black bear, but she had to be close, real close. It scared the shit out of both of us, and we spent the 3-hour drive back home basically just periodically yelling, "Fucking bears!" during sentences or in moments of silence. I don't know if this counts, but a few years ago, I was diagnosed with psychotic depression, and I guess the scariest thing that happened to me in the woods was suddenly finding myself in the woods. I had a major psychotic episode one night before I was diagnosed and found myself deep in the woods. I live in a pretty forested area with no shoes on and no idea where I was or how I got there. No phone or flashlight either. I can't describe the fear and confusion of just suddenly being somewhere. I decided late one evening to go for a hike. Basically, I hated my roommate, and I just wanted to get out, even if I had to do it alone. I'm an experienced hiker, I'm able-bodied, and the trail was very close to civilization. I'd be fine. Now, what happened to me could easily be explained as being caused by something animal or human, so I'm not suggesting anything. I'll just tell it how it happened. I drive up to the parking lot at the trailhead, and there were only 2 other cars there. It was only about 8 or 9 at night midweek. One of the cars had just arrived, and the guy inside got out. He was young, college age, and was wearing running shoes, a jacket, and tights. He took his flashlight and started his run up the trail. The other car had probably been there for a while as no one was in it. Since it was night and sketchy, I decided to take my machete with me. It's been my hiking camping companion for years. I didn't expect to use it, but I figured it was better than nothing in the rare chance of cougar attack or rape. So I started hiking, flashlight in left hand, machete in the crook of my right arm, hidden so that if someone saw my silhouette, they wouldn't get freaked out, ready to draw if needed. I remember seeing the light from the runner disappear further up the canyon. I kept walking and nothing happened. I didn't even walk all that far. My original intent was to scout out a possible hammock hanging spot in case I wanted to camp later. There's a creek running along the trail, and I checked down it, only to find that the creek was completely dry. It was midwinter, albeit a mild one, and had no water in it at all. I eventually get a good ways up the trail and pause a bit to listen in case I was being followed by a mountain lion or coyote. I was paranoid for some reason. Then I start hearing the sound of sloshing water in regular intervals. It sounded a lot like a human wading through knee-deep water. It was coming from the creek. I shone my light down, but there was nothing there. No creature, no water, nothing, but still sloshing. I hold the machete ready to draw. Then a little further up the canyon, but off the trail, I hear the sounds of branches breaking, like some large creature tromping through the woods. So I say, screw this, I'm out of here, and start walking back. I didn't run, just in case it was a wild predator, which liked to chase running things. So a little down the trail, I stopped to listen if there was any sound still. I could hear footsteps on gravel, going crunch, crunch, crunch in regular intervals, as if whatever it was had two legs. But when I shined my light, nothing was there. At the time, I assumed that it was some hiker like me up the trail around a bend. I kept walking. Down near the parking lot, I stopped again. The footsteps had stopped. So I go a little off the main trail and crossed the dry creek and crouched and waited for whatever was behind me to pass. Then I hear the gravel footsteps again, coming from the direction of the main trail. I extinguish my light, crouch down, and stay still to see who will pass. I wait and listen to the sound of the footsteps make its way past me. When it was barely past where I was, it stopped, but I could not see anything there. I waited a bit and shined my light. No one was there. I was alone, so I walked back to my car. Once in the car, I waited a bit, hoping to see a hiker come back. No one came back, and the two cars in the parking lot were still there. I just hoped that no one else had a similar experience that night, trying to explain the lone man carrying a machete up the canyon at night and having to sneak past him. I was camping with about 5 of my friends. We set up in the same forest as we would usually and just sat around talking with our flashlights on. One of my friends, I'll call him Kevin, said he quickly needed to go to the gas station. It was quite close to where we set up, so it wasn't that out of the ordinary. Once he had left at around 2 to 3 minutes, I started hearing a quiet, highish pitched voice saying, "Come here," from where Kevin had left. When I asked my friends about it, they said it was most likely Kevin as his voice wasn't that deep either. But the voice kept getting deeper. Every time it would say, "Come here," it would sound slowed down, like if you slow down a YouTube video. Eventually, one of my friends, let's call him John, stood up to go check out what it was. Then Kevin came up behind us, carrying a couple of snacks and drinks. When John turned around and saw Kevin, the voice in an extraordinarily deep pitch said, "Come here." It wasn't Kevin, because he was right behind us, so who was it? That was it. We all started booking it for the gas station. We then heard the voice coming closer and leaves crunching behind us. Once we got to the station, we told the cashier to lock the doors. He was reluctant at first, but when he saw a dark figure rushing towards us, he happily obliged. We got some other friends to pick us up, and let's say we never went back to that forest. I was in Boy Scouts and went camping with my troop near a lake in the woods. We went camping here every year during the summer for a week. Anyway, on this particular day, the weather was pretty crappy, in particular very windy. At first, we didn't think much of it until it started getting really dark out in the middle of the afternoon, and we started seeing a bunch of funnels start to forming in the sky. At first, we were kind of fascinated, and it started to hail out a bit, but then the wind started picking up, and we watched as a funnel started forming and getting bigger and bigger right across the lake from where we were camped, and our adult leaders go in full panic mode. They have us run a little ways down from the campsite to this sort of ditch area. We were all watching as the funnel turned into a tornado on the lake and started making its way toward us. That's when we were like, oh shit. It came pretty close to us, but thankfully changed directions and all we got was really wet from the lake water it was blowing around. We watched it go for a little while longer before it went away. So yeah, that was pretty scary. 16 at the time, was walking just outside the woods in what I thought was a safe area. I had one earbud in. When I walk at night, I always make sure to be aware of my surroundings. It was about 3 in the morning. I heard someone catcall me from inside the woods. I glanced around to see no one. I kept walking until I heard someone shout out, "Hey you, get the fuck back here." I turned around just as 3 large men, probably late 30s, early 40s, emerged from the woods. I instantly burst into a run, and I don't think I ever ran that fast. They began chasing me and telling me they just wanted to show me something in the woods. I screamed back that I carried knives on me, and I wasn't hesitating on killing them if they touched me. I think I had 3 different knives on my person, since I never walk in the dark without at least one. They seemed to slow down, but still were in pursuit. I ran faster than I've ever ran before. I was nearing my house, so I hopped into my neighbor's backyard before hopping into my own and going in through the back door. I locked every window and door, called the police, and began to cry hysterically. Police show up, take my statement, and then I cried myself to bed. This is the exact reason I refuse to let myself or anyone I care about walk alone at night, and also why I will not ever walk alongside a forest again. Okay, so I used to live in rural Michigan, and my cousin and I were best friends at the time, decided to explore the forest behind his house, and we heard gunshots. Now that was normal, people would hunt there, but what wasn't normal were the bullets landing at our feet. And we both are like, what the fuck? And we sprint behind trees, and the bullets stop. We decide to investigate where they came from, and we find an old locked hunting shed. But the thing is that we had been in this part of the woods and have never seen it before, and the lock was rusted to the lock so it wouldn't even move it. My cousin and I looked at each other, and I grabbed a log and broke the lock with one hit. I was 10, 4'5", and 90 pounds. That's how weak and rusted the lock was. And the only thing inside of the shed was a pristine condition DeWalt drill and a hunting rifle that looked like it had been there since the 1930s, and that's it. To this day, 6 years later, we still think that someone had disturbed a dead guy's old favorite hunting spot, and the ghost was angry and started shooting at us. I work at a camp in the Sierra Nevadas in California, in bear territory. The camp had seen bears coming through fairly regularly over the years, but most were fairly easily scared off. The year previous to me working there weren't many sightings of any kind, let alone an invasive incident. We started having incidents that summer, mostly found after the intrusions into tents and such. Then the bear was seen firsthand a time or two and wasn't easy to scare off. One night, I'm walking down the hill to scare off the bear. They stopped, and I figured they'd succeeded, and I didn't know exactly where the bear was. There was a bin directly behind the lodge where trash was accumulated before being hauled to a bear-proof dumpster a ways out of camp each evening. As I pass this bin, I see a couple of staffers to my left with the bin on the right, and they look rather fixed on the bin. I stop dead in my tracks and look to my right, and there's the 400+ pound dark brown phase black bear about 10 feet away, looking back at me. He does a deep huff at me, looking me right in the eyes. I know better than to freak and run, and instead, I stand staring back a moment. The bear looks away just a bit, and I take this as my cue to slowly turn back and slowly start walking on my way again. There's an odd tension to holding back the urge to run, metering your movements to be slow and deliberate. Thankfully, it worked, and the appeal of trash was greater than wanting to get rid of me. I was the shooting sports director, and one of my duties was to fire a salute cannon at flag ceremonies. There was a small replica meant for small boats to fire salutes, and used 10-gauge shotgun blanks. After passing the end of the lodge, I turned, walked up to the porch, and went inside and immediately got the cannon end around. The back ramp, ADA access, was directly opposite the trash bin. The bear was still there, and I went down the first slope of the ramp. It seemed like I didn't have a clean shot for maximum effect, so I walked halfway down the next slope, a zigzag affair. I set it down, pointed directly at the bear, and fired. The bear took off running behind the bin until its feet landed in the creek behind the lodge, and it decided it should stop and take a drink. After drinking, it started to amble back toward the trash bin. For that night, I gave up. The state ended up issuing a permit, and I shot the bear about 2 weeks later in a similar bin raid. I was on vacation in a coastal town in my country that's in the middle of a forest by the sea. We had been drinking with my friends and were pretty drunk and ready to play some poker, but everyone decided to call it a night. I didn't want to go to sleep, so I took a shot of moonshine, grabbed my coat and a mountain bike, and decided to go for a ride at 3 a.m. I decided to leave my phone in the house since there's no reception anywhere in the town. I just took my ID in case the police stopped me and some cash to buy some cigarettes. I went to the town center and got the cigs. Decided to go back to the beach. Hung around there but got really cold since it was winter and there was a lot of wind. I then decided to ride around the outskirts of town and through the woods. As I'm getting deeper and deeper into the forest, I kept hearing sounds, so I stop and check my surroundings. I then see 3 sets of glowing eyes in the dark staring at me. I decide to get the fuck out of there. As I'm getting closer to one of the roads circling down, I hear the leaves rustling and lo and behold, there's a pack of 5 stray dogs running at me full speed. I manage to get to the road and they start catching up. The roads are made of compressed sand that had gotten pretty loose over the course of the day, so I could have accelerated that much. And they started trying to bite my legs and my bike. One caught my right leg by the pant fabric and I managed to kick his head. Luckily, as the other dogs were about to catch up to me, a car passed by and honked at us and they decided to chase for the car. It took me an hour to figure out where I was and get back to the house. The next day, I was talking to a park ranger about this, and he told me to be careful since there's a pack of stray dogs that's been killing cats and house dogs for 2 weeks now. Right, so I was about 13 or 14 when my family decided to go camping. I went off my own to explore. We were in a sort of nature park when suddenly the wind picked up. The trees sounded creaky, and it was really eerie. I felt a twinge of dread, like suddenly I was not safe, and that's when I saw them. Graves. Like actual gravestones, just in the middle of these woods, and I walked a little closer to get a better look. They were old, like at least 100 years. The gravestones were close to each other, but in 2 rows, about a dozen in total. I looked at the dates, and they were from the 1890s, and the spooky part was that the graves weren't for adults. These were child's graves. Never booked it out of there so fast, never spoke of it since. Edit. So it wasn't quite the fact that they were graves, but the fact that they were child graves in the middle of a nature trail, that and the eerie feeling I mentioned, it just felt like something was off and I wasn't safe, like a gut feeling or something, or maybe I was just paranoid. I used to live in way upstate New York, and one time while my friends and I were playing manhunt in the pitch black woods at 11 p.m. or so, in a blind stupor of running frantically away from the vicious seekers, I tripped over a rock and fell pretty hard. I turned on my flashlight. It's not a good idea unless you want to get found. And to my immediate left was a massive stick that could have sunk right through my stomach. When I say I landed next to it, I mean I was less than an inch away from this thing impaling my 11-year-old body. That was an experience. This took place around 50 years ago. I used to go into the woods on my own from age 11 when we moved to the area. It wasn't until I was 14 or 15 that I realized how potentially dangerous it was. One day I was walking along the lower paths into the woods and saw 2 boys around the same age walking towards me. I knew one of them, but not the other. The second boy touched my arm as we passed, and I thought nothing of it. It was only a few feet past them when the boy I knew said something I should carried or walking. Instead, I turned and tripped due to my ill-fitting shoes, one of which came off. As I recovered my balance, one of the boys retrieved my shoe. I held my hand out for it and found myself in a standoff. I could not go anywhere without my shoe, and the boys refused to return the shoe without some form of sexual favor as a reward. I was frightened to go home with only one shoe. They were ill-fitting because they were hand-me-downs. My mother had told me there was no money for new shoes, and I had to make do with the pair of my grandmother's cast-offs. So I sat down on the grass between the lower and upper paths and waited them out. I was there for more than an hour, holding them at bay with words until they eventually left my shoe and walked away. The clincher was when I threatened to tell the mother of the first boy if anything else happened. To be honest, I never thought that anything would happen because of knowing the family of the boy, but that's what all victims think, don't they? I was lucky. When I was 14, I was walking around with maybe 6 or 7 people. An area near my auntie's used to be rife with homeless people and is right opposite an active mental asylum. We got chased by a homeless or mental person screaming until we outran him. Police were called when we went back, We led them to the area usually occupied by homeless people and found a bed, a dildo, and a knife and nothing else. Never heard anything about it or found out if he was caught. People who live or spend a lot of time in the wilderness. Did you ever witness something inexplicable or that felt supernatural while out in the wild? If yes, what happened? I used to work in an overnight camp where I spent 10 weeks a year minimum living in the woods. I love hiking and go as often as possible. Anyways, of course, I think anyone who spends enough time outside has, but this can be due to a lot of things. Not limited to, but definitely including the uncanny valley effect. The one I can think of was one night where I was leading a night hike. These are super cute little hikes that happen just after dark, where you lay in a big field starting at dusk, do bat calls, and make sure you keep your flashlights off the whole time, so when you go for the hike, your eyes are more adjusted, and all you really need is the moonlight and to watch your step. A little background. Camp had no streetlights, and all outer building lights were on automatic timers or manually turned off after a certain point by staff. Most camp lights were not even turned on as there wasn't really a reason to unless the weather was bad. We communicated via walkie-talkies. All staff with kids were required to have at least one walkie per group. I had ours on this particular hike. Back to the story. So, we were going on our normal route, and I was giving my little spiel about animals that lived in the night. We got to this little pavilion where my favorite part of the hike happens. Each person gets a mint, and you pick a partner and watch their mouth when they bite down on it. It gives a little spark you can see. I didn't have a partner, so I was just watching the group when right in front of my eyes I saw the spark. It was kind of weird, but figured it was just a trick of the light, so we started hiking back. On the trail, once I turned around as I was leading, I saw someone standing in the path, probably about 100 feet ahead. The kids saw the person too, as they asked who it was, excitedly expecting it to be part of the hike. I said it was my coworker, who was off camp for the night, figuring it was probably someone playing a trick on us. Then the figure started walking toward us. My walkie that was on my hip started spewing the weather channel. I jumped, fixed my walkie back to the right channel, and when I looked back, the person was gone. One of the kids asked where my coworker went, and I just said they must have gone to bed. I, to this day, have no idea who it was, if it was a person, or how they managed to get from right in front of me to behind me down the path so fast. I asked everyone in the morning if they'd been out on the path, but no one owned up to it. It was crazy. Never had anything quite like that again. I wasn't living in the wilderness per se, but I was in a house in the woods in rural Pennsylvania. You get used to all kinds of noises and even moans and unsettling sounds. And you also get used to what is normal. Bears, yes, they walk right upright sometimes. Deer, critters, etc. And what is not. One incident happened to me, where I heard a low guttural growl outside my window. I had seen bears outside my window, so I wasn't alarmed, but this growl sounded distinctly different from any other growls I had previously heard. When I went to the window, I saw something in the distance with red glowing eyes. This is actually somewhat of a normal thing to see. Foxes and the like sometimes have glowing eyes at night, but what disturbed me was when the two glowing dots raised up, and whatever was kneeling was now standing. It had to have been over 7 feet, 2.5 meters tall. I couldn't shut my curtains because I was nervous about losing sight of whatever this was. I pulled out my phone to record it, and that amount of time, it had dashed on 2 feet across all of the length of the woods I could see and disappeared. I sometimes saw strange tracks after that, and still sometimes heard its guttural call. Not saying anything supernatural happened, but it was certainly inexplicable to me. I no longer reside there. I was living on Vancouver Island in Canada 6 years ago. I had a music festival coming up on the weekend one February, and the preceding week off because work was really slow. None of my friends were free, so I decided to go backpacking solo on a nearby trail Tuesday to Thursday, followed by the festival all weekend. Pretty great week, I figured. Covered a lot of ground Tuesday and Wednesday, had one short day of hiking left, so I decided to have a fire Wednesday evening and make a night of it. I'll preface the following events with the fact that I smoked a joint and drank 6 ounces or so of whiskey. Feel free to doubt my lucidity, because I sure do. Anyway, I had a nice fire going until 11 p.m., and had no neighbors camping on the same beach as me. I took a walk up the beach as my fire burned down and was just singing songs to myself as I polished off my whiskey. I sat down and was staring over the ocean at the stars. I noticed one star in particular was brighter than the rest. The more I stared at this star, the more weird things I noticed about it. For starters, it seemed to be subtly changing color. It would be bright white and then shift slightly blue, green, or red. It also seemed to be swaying slightly, barely noticeable at first, but more pronounced the longer I stared. Eventually, it appeared to be doing a small figure 8 in the sky. When I noticed this, I started thinking it was an aircraft, drone, or a satellite of some kind. I sat, kinda crunk, staring at it until 11:46. This was the last time I checked my watch. I stood up and started walking down the beach to my camp, ready for bed. I glanced back at the star, craft, whatever, while I was walking to find it was following me as I walked down the beach. It wasn't just moving perpendicular to me, it was moving closer at a diagonal. As it got closer to me, the light it emitted got dimmer and dimmer until it wasn't shining at all. I could make out what looked like a dark green metallic plating on it when it got quite close. At this point, I'm pretty freaked out. I can hear a swishing noise coming from it, kind of like a strong wind in the trees, but it was a very calm night. I started running until I got to my fire. I turned to look at it. It was 15 meters or so away, right in front of me. I just stood there dumbfounded, staring at this thing, afraid to move or yell at it. I just stood there. After what felt like an eternity, it slowly started moving away from me. I was counting my blessings when 30 meters out or so, it stopped. It then got very bright very quickly, and that's the last thing I remember. I came to as the sun crested the horizon in front of me. I was leaning on a log next to my burnt-out campfire. It was 6 in the morning. I was absolutely frozen, shaking, and super confused. I had at least 5 hours completely unaccounted for. I got out of there as quickly as I could. That festival I'd been looking forward to, I went for 2 hours but just couldn't reconcile what had happened, so I left that night and drove 2.5 hours home. I started researching alien abductions and got really paranoid until it got to a point that it was literally ruining my life. I've since convinced myself that it was a waking nightmare, and honestly it's better this way. Ignorance is bliss. When I was around 8 or 9, my family left me at our cabin to tend to the cows for a day. My uncle usually watched over them, but my mom had to drive him to the city to pick up a few things. It was around 5 p.m. that I decided to look for the cattle. They go deep into the woods sometimes, so it took about a good 30 minutes to locate them. Once I reached them and got an idea where they were, I headed back home. By then it was twilight. As I was walking through the forest, I felt like something was following me. I heard again on my right side. Whenever I stopped, it stopped. I was trying not to freak out, thinking it was my imagination. I started to walk faster back home, and the thing was still on my right side. I glanced to my side and saw that this thing was peach-colored. It looked like a naked person going behind the trees. After seeing it, I ran home as fast as I could and hid under the blankets. Once my mom and uncle came back, I told them what I saw. My uncle thinks it may have been a bear with mange, but damn, it really did look like a naked person. When I was a kid, I used to spend my summers at my grandparents' summer home, which is located precisely in the middle of Mountainville nowhere. Like, there's not even gravel road access to the house. You gotta trek through some pretty dense bush on a pretty steep incline in order to get there. Because I was a kid, one who had no inkling of what the internet was, I loved everything about it. Endless exploration, rock climbing, and other danger-seeking opportunities. Convincing my grandfather to build me and my cousin a treehouse, eating the best food known to man, swapping scary stories by a campfire, everything was awesome. Everything except that one time I came across a random well in the middle of the woods. Now, wells in and of themselves can be pretty creepy, but I think this one takes the cake. It looked like something that belongs in a medieval fantasy horror story. It had this really tall, pointy thatched roof, part of which was collapsed, a base made of gray, mossy, misaligned stones, and it even had a wooden bucket, which didn't strike me as weird at the time. Wells always have a bucket in pictures, right? But looking back, that bucket was spiffy clean. It was made of this nice, glossy wood that wasn't chipped or marred in any way. Basically looked brand new, so that was weird. I remember stumbling upon this well, and instead of being absolutely thrilled to explore it like my recklessly curious child self would have been, I felt sick, like physically nauseous. I couldn't stand to look at this thing without just feeling gross. I had zero desire to go near it. I did go near it because curiosity won out in the end, and I wanted to have a story to tell my cousin. We were always trying to outdare the other, so I went up to it and looked down. Man, I kid you not, this thing had stairs in it. Shiny wooden spiral stairs leading down into who knows where. For some reason, this scared the piss out of me, and I hightailed it out of there right quick. I never told my cousin because I know he would have wanted to go and find it and climb down, and the idea of doing that honestly made me feel like crawling out of my skin. It still does just thinking about it. Anyway, the real scary part about it is that this random ass well started popping up and still pops up in my dreams from time to time, like it just appears in the middle of whatever kind of dream I'm having. To this day, I'm an adult now, and it still scares the life out of me. To be honest, I don't believe in the supernatural, but I don't think I'll ever be able to overcome this instinctual fear to go down this well, in dream or otherwise. Having spent a crazy amount of time in nature, I don't get creeped out easily, but there's one property I've tried to explore a few times and had the most unsettling feelings while on it. I will never go on it again. Something feels bad there. It's a large old hunting acreage that has been logged at least once, at least 40 years ago. There are rusty orange gates at each end. The first time I walked in from the north, I started walking through the tangle of picker bushes, and about half a mile in, I found a fresh, bloody rib cage in the middle of the trail. No signs of animal trails. I noped out of there. I figured maybe a raptor dropped it as something was baiting predators, coyote hunters nearby, but it was still disturbing. Being a determined idiot, I decided to approach from the south, wanted to find the hunting camp on the property. It was 6 months later, nice spring day. The further I get in the property, the more bothered I feel. Not like I'm being watched, but just a sense of this is bad energy screaming at me. I shake it off and keep going. I cross a sketchy broken ATV bridge to get to this abandoned camp with stuff scattered all over the yard. Looks like no one's been there in at least 5+ years, but everything is in weirdly excellent condition. The creepy sense gets worse, and I'm like, I need to get the fuck out of here. There's no clear way out. To this day, I have no clue how these people used to access this building. The gates were rusted shut. No driveway from the south and no obvious path north. I go up what looks like a driveway, and it just leads deep into a swamp that gets ominously dark, freaking me out. Finally, I see light through the trees to the east. I bust through into a freshly logged area adjacent to the property and get the fuck out of there. The sense of doom or whatever went away as soon as I left the property. I'm not superstitious, but fuck that place. I don't know if someone was murdered there or what happened, but some bad fucking juju is tied to that land. I live in a mountain town in Australia with a national park forest wrapping around the town. About a year ago, I had to leave the house at 4 a.m. for a road trip. I closed the door behind me and stepped onto my porch to walk about 20 meters to my car. As soon as the door closed, I felt something weird around me. It was silent, utterly silent. Not a leaf rustling, not a frog croaking, not a distant truck or car, nothing. I turned my phone light on and could only see the edge of the light, and it didn't dim. It was just a hard line between the white of where my light fell and the dark of night. I looked up for the night sky and saw nothing but black. I felt like I walked across a small brick path that was suspended in a void. I went to my car quickly and quietly, threw my bag on the back seat and slipped in with a sigh of relief. As soon as I turned the car and its lights on, the feeling passed, and then I could see the sky again. I have no idea what happened, and I know that silence in the forest is usually indicative of the presence of a predator passing through, but whatever that was, it was something else. When I was a kid, 7-ish years old, my house was in a small neighborhood in the middle of nowhere surrounded by a forest. The nearest large town was about 30 minutes away by car. I was always outside as a kid and loved that our house backed up to part of the forest. Long story short, one day I was out playing and ran up the side of the house to go play on the swing set in my backyard. As I cornered the house, I was stopped in my tracks by this extremely scary-looking creature. It was about the size of a big raccoon, but it was very wide-bodied and had a wide mouth that I can't describe, besides that it was almost like it was grinning at me. I turned around and dipped out, and it began chasing me. But when I got to the front yard, it was just gone. I still think about it to this day. I'm 30 and have no clue what this thing was, but I clearly remember the dreadful feeling I had when I stumbled upon it. Went camping for extended periods of time, a month or more at a time. We camped in areas where the largest wildlife were usually condors passing over or the occasional lost dog or a feral dog. One year, My family and I all encountered some strange stuff happening at our campsite. Our food storages were broken into, items would randomly disappear and then reappear somewhere further away than none of us would put it there, like a cup would somehow disappear from the table and be found standing upright on the edge of the campground, or a shoe would disappear from right outside the tent and be found on the top of a bush near the communal bathroom. We'd hear something large walking around our campsite at night, scrapping high up on the tent. We'd find weird tracks in the area that looked like small cow prints, and some that looked like misshapen bear prints at night. The woods would be unusually quiet. We'd hear what sounded like whispering at odd hours of the night, etc. One day, all of us older kids were given machetes, and the younger kids were given our old survival knives. We were told to go play in the lake, but to keep an eye on our stuff while some of the adults were going to head into town. So, we're playing in the lake and talking about this weird stuff happening and going back and forth about what it might be. Bears, serial killer, fawns, hobos, Bigfoot, werewolves, and we look to the shore and see something large by our stuff. I wear glasses and can't see for shit without them, so all I saw was a big black blob, and I kept asking everyone what that was, but they wouldn't give me an actual description. They just kept saying, I don't know, it's a big thing. So we start making a bunch of noise and swimming toward the shore. Then my cousin stopped us because he says he saw it pick up one of our machetes and it just continued standing there. We ended up swimming to the other side of the lake and hiking back to retrieve our stuff. The entire time, we kept trying to not talk about the likelihood of us coming back to a crime scene or getting murdered in the woods. Whenever I asked for more description of what it was, I couldn't get an actual response. It was a person, but it was way too big to be a person. No, it was a person's size, but it was just really hairy. No, it wasn't super hairy. It was just had pitch black skin. No, it was too tall to be a person, and its limbs weren't right. A few hours later, we retrieved our stuff that was now thrown around the area we had left it in. Mine and my cousin's shorts were missing, a different cousin's shirt was missing, and we only found 3 of the 10 socks that were supposed to be there, but thankfully, all the machetes and knives were accounted for. We snuck up to the campsite and found everything trashed, and the 2 adults who had been left at the site came over in a hurry with one of the camp rangers. They explained that something had been circling the area, so they went to find us, but couldn't find us at the lake, so they went to get a ranger, and thankfully they found us before the search had actually started. We explained that we had seen something by the lake edge, and that we had to hike back from the other side. The ranger took all of our statements and kind of shrugged, saying maybe it was a bear just passing through the area for the first time in over 50 years. Then he left and told us to stay safe. We cleaned up the campsite and found 2 of our tents absolutely shredded, and a small propane tank was in the extinguished fire pit. When the other adults got back from town, all of us kids were put into one tent while the adults chatted quietly. We saw that one of our uncles had had a friend bring some of his guns from home. My uncle is a bit of a hunting nut or gun enthusiast, and from what we could hear, none of the people in town knew of any bears or new wildlife in the area. But there had been a lot of campers leaving early that year. We were all put to bed early in one tent and told to keep our weapons near us, lanterns off, and to not leave for anything, but to be careful. We all ended up sleeping in shifts, and thanks to that, we found out that the adults were doing the same thing. We packed everything up the next morning and ended up the camping trip about 3 weeks early. About 2 years later, we started camping again, but it was on a more touristy camping park near the lake. Not sure if I'd say this was in the wilderness really, but in the middle of nowhere country. When I was younger, my dad would pick me up every other weekend to visit. At this time, he lived an hour or so away, and between where I lived and where he was a lot of open country. One night, while riding to his place, we see some weird lights in the sky off in the distance. My dad pulls over and we just watch as off in the distance, we see these streaks of multicolored lights shooting from one end of the horizon to the other. My memory isn't exact, but I remember different colors like red and blue as well as others. The lights were quick like lightning, but didn't exactly look like lightning. Kind of jagged like lightning, not straight. They also came and went from both sides of the horizon. They were not originating from the same location and were going horizontally, not vertically. They made no sound, but also seemed far away. We watched for a while and eventually got back in the car and kept driving. I saw them for a bit still, but they eventually stopped. My dad thought maybe there was some chemical blast or something. We checked the news and never saw anything about it. I'm sure there's some normal answer for it, but I've never heard of anything like it before. This experience was not in the wild, but I sure feel it's supernatural. I don't comment much, but I think I need to share this. During my high school, I was very much into supernatural stuff. I used to watch A Haunting on Discovery Channel, and after that I started becoming paranoid. One night, around 2 a.m., I finished watching an episode of A Haunting. Immediately after that, I went to sleep in my room, which was in fact a very small room with a window. That window was around 3 to 4 arms lengths away, which was protected by steel railing and steel mesh. So, I was half asleep with my back towards the window, and suddenly I started to feel that someone is near me and is just standing just beside my bed. I ignored that feeling, but immediately after some 15 seconds I could hear it breathe, like someone's actual breathing near my ears, as if someone was trying to show his presence in the room. I got drenched in sweat. My mouth was dry. I gathered all of my courage and immediately stood up and ran towards my mom's bedroom and told her everything. She came to my room running, checked through the window, but no one was there. She then tried to calm me down by telling me it could have been some thief. She also suggested it could have been a rat, and according to her, rats' breathing is too loud. But I will never believe any of her theories, because first, if it would have been a thief, then how come he was easily able to climb down a 3-story building? And secondly, a thief would never breathe so loud near my ears, and I find the rat theory absurd. Guess I will never know, but since then, I've stopped watching horror TV shows and all, and it basically had an overall improvement in my behavior. I wouldn't say I spend a lot of time outdoors, but I did go on a week-long camping trip with friends this one time. They had an RV, and we basically spent the time swimming, drinking, and shooting the shit. We also went on a few guided hikes with a ranger. I thought it was odd, but he said he'd just taken a liking to us and wanted to make sure we didn't miss out on the cooler spots, so I was game. The only weird thing was like the third hike, when we were really deep in the woods after about an hour and a half. As we kept walking, dude stops and asks us if we've seen stairs out here before. I thought he was talking about like locals staring at us or something, but then he points down the trail a bit and no shit, there's a big ass carpeted staircase just right fucking there, a few yards off the path, immaculately clean, like it was just built there. Honestly, I kind of forgot what he had to say about them, but he did make it very fucking clear that we cannot go up them. Like he was so serious that it honestly really got me spooked. So we just kind of passed them and kept going, eventually hitting a small waterfall and just having a good time out there. Sunset hits, we start heading back, and I shit you not, the stairs were gone. I was basically just told, this happens, they're incredibly unsafe, and don't question it. Some of the weirdest shit I've ever gone through, honestly. Whole thing felt like a fever dream. Serious. Sailors, seamen, and overall people who spend a vast amount of time in the ocean, have you ever witnessed something you would catalog as supernatural or unusual? What was it like? Distress flares in the middle of the Indian Ocean, sailing Nigeria to Japan at night when I was a third mate. Looked less than 4 miles away. Altered course to it, called the old man. Found nothing and no one over the course of 2 hours. I was the only one to see it, and I know what I saw. My watchman was down closing cabin shades. I understand why we had to move on. Keeps me up some nights though. Did we come so close to saving someone's life and just leave them there? Alone in the ocean, no food or water? Did someone think they were rescued, but we ended up too far from them? Should we have waited until daytime? Did I just hallucinate? Sailed on tall ships for a good while, among other things. Saw some green flashes, a moonbow, lots of phosphorescence, big whales, St. Elmo's fire on our mast, steel ship this time. But the only creepy story was at port. The only person who had ever died on the ship was over 100 years ago, and he fell from the rigging, went splat. One of the crew was up furling sails and was about to step out onto the foot rope that runs along the yard. He said he got an overwhelming urge to not step on it and felt a tug on his harness, keeping him from stepping out. He was so freaked out, he kept the other 2 guys behind him from getting on the line as well. The other guys started getting a really bad feeling too, and they decided to check out the foot rope. It had been really degrading on the inside, even though the outside looked mostly fine. The line probably would have snapped as they climbed out there, and they would have fallen, as you are pretty much free climbing until you get to a stopping point. Spent a lot of time sailing commercially in the Irish Sea. On night watch, you're always acutely aware of everything around you due to the silence and darkness. Some of the sounds you hear are deeply unsettling. I remember on a perfectly still night, just hearing a gentle knocking noise coming from what seemed like the outside of the hull at the waterline. No idea what it was, but it freaked me out all shift. Granddad was a chief in the Navy. Dad is a merchant marine. I'm a sailor right after my first tour. Me and Granddad are both medical, so we have some ghost stories. One of his stories was a case of mass somnambulism, sleepwalking, on the USS Roosevelt that he documented but was never publicly addressed or explained back in the 60s. Sleepwalking is dangerous, not only because of the risks of injury, but because of the implications of underlying issues like night seizures or sleep apnea. A few dozen people sleepwalking a month is not unheard of on a carrier, but apparently in a 3-month period, there was over 400 plus individual cases from over 100 sailors, from lower enlisted to senior officers, that were reported independently. These people came from all over the carrier, and he said he couldn't find any link to them. He was tasked with recording, but was never briefed on why it was happening, what caused it, or why it stopped. It was just dropped. Our speculation is drugs or government testing, but we'll never know for sure. That's one of my granddad's stories. One of mine was on a smaller ship, that was getting rough turbulence while underway in the Pacific. I swear we went into some kind of Bermuda Triangle shit because we got into this super calm part. I'm assuming the eye or some shit. I'm not a meteorologist, and it felt like an out-of-body experience. Like the world paused and everything kind of became quiet and ringing like tinnitus for what felt like at least a half hour. And then, suddenly it all came flooding back, like being forced back into my body and being aware. It was still calm at that point, and we'd only felt the calm for maybe a few minutes. But I talked to some of my guys afterwards, and they felt something similar. At the calm point, some said they felt high. I wouldn't know about it. One of our lieutenants said he felt like he passed out and woke up like sleepwalking. It was a surreal, shared experience. Doc on the ship, our corpsman chief, said it was probably some pressure drop that made us feel disoriented though, but we still joke we all got abducted for a minute and returned. In the Gulf of Aden, having been at sea for a while and with absolutely blistering heat, I heard my nickname called 3 times, clearly and loudly. It was my first time with this particular crew, and none of them knew my nickname. My best guess is dehydration and stress, but I'll never forget it. The closest to supernatural, or at least something I can't explain, happened halfway between Cornwall and the Scillies. We were sailing in a fresh breeze, 5 to 6 feet swells maybe. That's perfectly fine sailing weather, but the boat will rock and there will be quite a bit of noise from the wind, the sails, and waves. So, we sail happy along when suddenly the sea is perfectly flat and everything is quiet, like somebody turned the sound off. I looked around and the water is pitch dark. It only lasted for a minute and then everything was back to normal, but I got a really eerie feeling. Flew helicopters in the Navy for a few years. On my first deployment to Southeast Asia, I was flying over the Sea of Japan and saw a large pulsing aura of red light far enough below the surface I could not make out a source. We were 30-ish miles from shore and had not been briefed on any assets in the area that might make something like that make sense. No erroneous indications or instruments or radio chatter, just slow, steady pulsing red light. We saw it, circled it a few times, made a note of the time and location we encountered it, and my crew chief asked if I wouldn't mind getting the hell out of there. So, we finished our transit, and I made a note of everything in my debrief. I passed it up to chain of command, but they basically wrote it off as some sort of visual phenomenon we had from a long day of flying in dry suits. It's always been hard to imagine our entire crew hallucinating the same thing. I was on navigation watch with the second mate one night off the Philippines. The ship was on autopilot making for Manila. It was clear, still, dark night. Through the binoculars, I picked up navigation lights of another ship about 5 degrees off the port bow. It was well off, but I noted the bearing and checked the radar. Nothing. This was not unusual. If it was one of the small local fishing vessels, they can be hard to pick up. On the other hand, they usually don't bother with navigation lights either. Quickish technical detail. Skip if familiar with the purpose and function of nav lights. Navigation lights on a vessel are baffled so they can only be seen from a certain direction. Looking at a boat dead ahead coming toward you, you'll see a red light to the right of a green light. This is what I could see. If the boat turns to their right or starboard, the two lights will begin to move together, and the green light will fade from view because of the baffles that are around it. As the turn continues, you'll be able to see the red port, their left side light only, and a bit later, the white stern light will appear as the red fades behind its baffles. This way, you can tell in an instant the orientation of another vessel in the dark. 10 minutes passed, and I checked the bearing again, still 5 degrees off the port bow, red and green visible. I checked the radar again, still nothing. I alerted the second mate. 5 minutes later, nothing changed, nothing on radar. We were on a collision bearing with an invisible vessel that was steadily getting closer. As a precaution, we switched back to manual steering and I took the helm. By now I could make out the lights without the binoculars still coming directly at us. We were on point of taking evasive measures when suddenly the lights started moving together. We assumed that the other vessel had finally spotted us and was turning away to their right. I was expecting the red light to fade from view, except it didn't. The two lights simply swapped position. The red went to the left and the green went to the right. They remained 5 degrees off the port bow, and then they moved back again. Still nothing on the radar, nothing through the binoculars. We eventually passed the lights within 20 meters. From the wing of the bridge, I could see with perfect clarity straight down at it, whatever it was. There was nothing to see except the two lights, one red and one green, floating freely in air about 10 feet above the ocean, reflecting back off the waves gently and occasionally swapping positions in the night. NMB, not me, but my friend's dad is an old, like 30 or 40-year US Navy vet, no-nonsense kind of guy. Many years ago, he was on a ship, and he got a call a sailor was freaking out and trying to jump from the ship. He was crying and saying he needed to get to his mother. Not long after getting the guy calmed and into the medical area, they received the message the sailor's mother had died that night. When I was roving patrol on a submarine, I always thought I saw someone walking parallel to me down missile compartment upper level. If I was on the port side, then I saw them on the starboard side and vice versa. I always chalked it up to pipes and valves creating weird shadows. Additionally, it felt heavy on that level, like there was some sort of presence, the feeling you get when someone's watching you. I never told anyone. Then, one day a few weeks into patrol, one of the other rovers asked me if it felt weird up there. He specifically said that he saw someone up there too, just like I had. We shared stories and then talked to the third rover, and he said, I only go up there to do my rounds every hour and then get the fuck out of that haunted level. I crewed on a tall ship, and we were anchored with a bunch of others in harbor. We had to take shifts at night because it was an old boat and did weird things. I was on shift in the little steering cabin when I heard someone running around the deck. I thought it was one of the other crew, so I poked my head out and told them to knock it off. They kept running and I was afraid they'd slip, so I followed them. We went around the whole ship twice before I caught up with a shapeless shadow, which stopped and flew directly up into the air. Convinced it was a prank, I walked back to the end of the boat when I saw we had drifted on anchor and were almost under the bow of a much larger ship. I called the rest of the crew and we sorted it out, but I might not have noticed until too late if it weren't for the weird shadow. I only worked as a walk-on, walk-off cabin attendant, but the old Sea Dogs always had far-fetched stories to tell. The engineer teaching us about watertight doors told us a story that happened to him on another ship that the same company used to own but was decommissioned and scrapped in 2011. These watertight doors separate the different bulkheads, underwater compartments that stop the whole ship from sinking if there is a hole in the hull. Think about the metal doors that slid down in the engine room of the Titanic. These doors are always closed. To get from compartment to compartment, there was a lever that you pulled and the door opened. You stepped through, then as soon as you let go of the lever, the door would close. For the safety of the ship, it would close tight shut, even if there was a person blocking it. On the older ship, there was an engineer who tripped and was crushed to death in one of these doors. Years later, this engineer who told me the story tripped and fell in the same door and was about to be crushed to death in the same way, but just before killing him, it stopped and opened again, despite no one being around and nothing touching the lever. And before anyone says that there must have been some safety thing installed, no. As I said before, the one job of these doors is to close no matter what or who is in the way. I was standing in the hangar bay, waiting for morning muster at dawn somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Looking out at the ocean, I was intrigued by how smooth as glass the water was reflecting the clouds in the sky. Then, the most beautiful, confusing, mesmerizing, and terrifying thing I ever saw happen. The water, for a moment, was so smooth that the horizon disappeared from view. I honestly got dizzy knowing that it was the middle of the ocean floating on water, but my eyes were trying to convince me the ship was floating on nothing. Then the water started slightly rippling and the horizon was visible again. Every morning at sea after that, I looked at the horizon, hoping it would happen again, but it never did. I've never found out what caused this scientifically. The closest thing I could ever find was it was some sort of variant of the Fata Morgana mirage. I don't think I will ever see anything as beautiful in my life ever again. Words fall extremely short at describing the feeling in that moment. From down in the engine room, the ship makes a lot of noise, even when it's not moving. Sometimes those creaks, groans, and bangs can sound a lot like voices. Another example that freaked us all out was when the whole engine team heard the same long, low moans all day. None of us knew where they were from until the deck officers told us we'd had some whales beside us most of the day in Alaska. For something genuinely creepy, every contract I've done since I was a cadet, at least one person has died on the boat. That's 8 years, at least 2 people a year. One of the most magical nights I ever had was when I was serving in the New Zealand Navy warship, and we were homeward bound after a long and unpredictable deployment. I was dealing with a bout of insomnia and decided to go down aft for a breath of fresh air. It was a very dark, moonless night, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I really began to appreciate the phosphorescence glowing in our wake, bright green against the dark water. Then I looked closer to see a pod of dolphins playing in the phosphorescence, leaving their own bright glowing trails as they streaked through the water. Now, I knew what it was and what caused it, but it was something that I imagined would have appeared quite mystical to sailors back in the past. It was stunning though. I sat and watched them for about an hour, such a vivid memory. I worked security on different ships. One time during night shift on a cruise ship, my colleague and I were in the security office watching the CCTV cameras and just talking shit to pass the time. At the exact same time, we both saw a black figure or shadow pass in front of the camera in the children's play area. We both got super freaked out, but kept watching the other cameras in the vicinity to see if whatever it was passed by those, as it was the only way it could go from where we saw it, and there was no way it could leave the area without passing by in front of one of the cameras. It never did. So, we went to the area to check it out, but obviously found nothing. Afterwards, we went back to review the footage and didn't see any shadow moving in the camera again, even though we both saw it the first time in the live feed. Needless to say, we kind of started avoiding the kids area at night after that. A lot of death happens out at sea. It was about 3 a.m. during my watch on an ocean passage. I was sleep deprived and fatigued. The sailing yacht was silhouetted against the moon, glistening on the water. Suddenly, a dolphin jumped from the water below the boom, broad reach, and splashed back in. Then again, then again, then again for the next 3 hours, with the exact position and sound over and over and over. I felt like I was descending into madness because I couldn't stop the apparent delusion. I'm still not sure if there ever was a dolphin or if it just happened once and was then stuck in some sort of mental loop. I was in the US Navy and worked in communications. I was a supervisor on my watch and enjoyed working the night tours while on deployment. We stood 12-hour watches from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Around 2 a.m. I hear some chatter over the 3MC, which is like our internal speaker system used between a few different stations on the ship. It's the bridge asking combat if they see anything on surface or air radar, maybe 10 miles out to our west. Combat returns with a negative, and I don't think anything of it. About 15 minutes goes by, and the bridge asks again, and asks are they sure there's nothing there. Then they ask us if we have any message traffic about any ships in the area, aircraft, or anomalous weather patterns. I ask one of the guys on watch to perform the request, and now my interest is piqued. I walk out of the comm center and head up to the bridge. I was on a frigate, so the walk was quick, and I get up there and ask what's going on. One of my buddies points me over to the port side and we walk over. There's about 5 or 6 circular-shaped lights, about 10 to 15 miles out in the clouds, pretty large. They aren't moving or flying around, but just looking stable. These lights are also casting lights downward on the ocean, and you could see the light refracting back at the water, almost as if it were a spotlight or a beam. From what we could see, it didn't appear to be lights shining up from the water because they wouldn't pass through the clouds. The clouds also weren't super thick. It was lightly overcast, and it was the middle of the night with no other light pollution or on the water. There was nothing in the message traffic about any ships, subs, or aircraft in the area. We were hundreds of miles from land, and the last report of any unusual weather patterns was a waterspout a few hundred miles away. We tried to take pictures with our onboard digital camera using a long exposure, but we couldn't capture the phenomenon. After about 90 minutes, the lights slowly faded one by one, and within 15 minutes, they had completely disappeared. I'm sure there's some sort of weather or atmospheric condition for what we saw, but for all intents and purposes, it fit the description of a UFO, unidentified flying object. Serious. 911 operators of Reddit. What is a call that keeps you up at night? 1 a.m. and the phone rings and I pick it up to hear a man screaming on the other end. No words, just screaming. Finally get him to tell me what happened, and he told me he heard a gunshot in his house and went to see what happened and found his brother in his room. He had shot himself. I was a dispatcher about 17 years ago. There were some funny calls I'd like to talk about, like the person who wanted to complain that their drug dealer stole their laptop. The one I don't like the most is the long call with a woman who was concerned about the landlord who didn't like her and her boyfriend was in the background, confirming her statements that the landlord was creepy. They found her body floating in the river the next day, except it turned out it was the boyfriend who killed her. Also, the recorded calls you have to listen to during training where they intentionally play you the sound of people dying on the phone while talking to a dispatcher so that you understand what the job might entail, and they can see how you react to it to see if you can stomach it and keep talking and providing details to units. I'm a firefighter, and I overheard a call on the radio from another unit. They were dispatched to a possible suicide. The information given while the crews were en route was patient's wife came home and found a note on the door saying, "Honey, I'm already gone. If you're reading this, please do not come in and see me like this." The crews arrived, and the next thing you hear on the radio was the paramedic telling dispatch code 4, meaning patient is deceased, and in the background you can hear the wife screaming bloody murder as loud as she could. It was chilling. I got a 911 call about a vehicle that ran off the road. The caller told me that the female driver was unconscious but had a pulse. He then proceeded to tell me that the passenger was a fatal. I asked if he had checked for a pulse, at which point he told me no. It was a young child that had been decapitated. I asked him to find anything he could to cover the child, because I didn't want the mother to regain consciousness and have that to be the last image she had of her child. It was 9:30 a.m. I'd been on shift since 7 a.m. All the ambulances had checked in for the morning mileage and radio checks. All was good. Call comes in on the emergency line. "My son is not breathing." "Okay, we got this." Start going through the steps of checking for a pulse, breath, while dispatching the closest ambulance. I'm almost to the part where we start CPR when the ambulance calls back, "Dispatch, our rig is dead." You've got to be fucking kidding me. You called me in this morning with a radio check. Did you not check your goddamn ambulance? Nearest ambulance is one whole county over. 30 minutes. 30 minutes for a situation that needs immediate medical intervention. The mother is screaming on the phone, crying. The sister comes in and starts screaming the name of her brother. I have to tell them the ETA for the ambulance is 30 minutes. It's been almost 10 years since I was in EMS dispatch, and I occasionally wake up in a cold sweat thinking about that call. Doesn't keep me up at night, but I do think about it from time to time. Had a daughter call in for her elderly mother experiencing chest pains. 10 minutes pass and I call for an ETA. They tell me they're there. The daughter gave me the wrong address. They had recently moved and she gave me the old address. The chest pains turned to trouble breathing. ETA 10 minutes. Mother isn't responding. Daughter is crying over the line. Paramedics arrive, perform CPR, and even use the defibrillator. Sadly, she didn't make it. I heard all this over the phone. At the time it hit me hard, but you get over it. So, I've had plenty of heartbreaking calls, but the one that actually keeps me up is because it was so weird and disturbing rather than tragic. So, setup. I work medical, and we cover a fairly large geographic area. Calls come over with minimal info from the first call takers, so we know location and that it's a medical issue. Okay, tell me exactly what happened. Standard first question. A young-sounding woman replies pretty calmly but energetically. My back hurts and Uncle Ricky is real." She proceeded to explain that she had chronic back pain and that she'd been in the hospital the day before because of it, but they didn't refill her meds while she was there, and Uncle Ricky made her throw her old ones out. The more we talk, the more irrational and erratic her answers get. I ask her to make sure the door is unlocked and pets are put away, and she says the door is open. Then she tells me about her cat and that it's already outside. Don't tell Uncle Ricky about her cat. He made them kill the last cat she had. Her dad and her cousins. They killed all the cats, but they're locked up now. She named off all her cats for me. There were a lot. She mentions that there's a Sasquatch outside. She can see its eyes in the woods. She kept this up for 20 minutes. Just before the ambulance arrives, she starts talking to someone who got there first. It's a patrol car that had been quietly sent. First thing the officer asks after addressing her by name, which wasn't the one she told me, "How did you get inside this house?" There was a logic in her rambling, a terrible consistency about her Uncle Ricky, but there was plenty of random mental health delusions in her conversation, and she was 30 miles out of town in a house that wasn't hers. Don't know what happened to her or what had happened to her. How much of what she told me was real or fantasy, of nightmarish delusions meant to lie to herself. I wonder whose house she was in, where they were, or why she picked that house. What was out in the woods looking at her? Was there even a cat there? Was Uncle Ricky actually real? In the end, long mental health calls trouble me the most. Delusional people tell almost believable stories with deep honesty. They've told me about werewolves and demons and ghosts at the foot of their bed. Some say their upstairs neighbor is poisoning them when they live alone. Most of the time, there is no follow-up on what was really happening, at least for the call takers, wondering how truthful the strange, frightening stories keep me up at night. Not quite sure if this counts, but my father works EMS. If you get a proper segue into the topic, he will tell you about the worst call he's been on. The worst call I've heard was a suicide, never a good case. He remembers arriving and seeing the guy's troubled loved ones. He made his way to the bedroom and got the scene of a bloody and gory mess ingrained into his head permanently. It was a suicide by 12-gauge blast to the face. He didn't eat for a few days and had to take off of work to digest the incident. Sure, okay. I was a medical dispatcher in Canada for a few years until I moved on to other things. Cool job, but not a lot of upward or even lateral movement from there. In Canada, we have some really rural places. If you start looking far enough to the north, it'll get dicey whether or not you even have drivable roads to some places. Your nearest dispatch could be 2-3 hours away, even longer. We got a call in for a labor in progress in one of these areas. Contractions were coming fast. I was on the line with the husband, guiding him through the process. Get some towels, a blanket, safety pin, position the mother, all that. I could hear the mom talking with him in the background in between contractions. She sounded good. They were really excited, a little scared as you would be. It was late at night, and as typical, we didn't have a lot of call takers on. Another emergency call came in, so I chucked them to another line, told them to keep it up and I'd be back in a minute, and bounced to answer the next call. Minor situation, quick dispatch, couple minutes, easy. Everyone in the room was giving me the look. Assisting with a birth is a bit of a dispatch rite of passage, and this kid was coming now. Everyone was all smiles. I'm feeling like a champ. I key back to the procedure for guiding a birth and flip back over to the mom and dad's line. It turned so fast. I was only gone maybe 2 minutes, and it turned so fast. Mom was bleeding vaginally. A lot. Too much. Way too much. In those 2 minutes, she went from sounding fine if agonized to death's door. Fuck. Okay. Dad tells me she's white as a sheet, gushing blood. She's getting faint. Just stay with me, honey. Don't go. Please, don't go. They're on their way. They'll be here soon. Just stay with me. The ambulance is still well over 90 minutes out. No RCMP nearby to respond. No first responders. They're out there in the sticks on their own. I hear her say goodbye to her husband. I hear him cry. Oh my God, please wake up. Wake up. She's not breathing. He's hysterical, but we can't be hysterical. We have to keep her blood moving. My blood is ice cold. There are tears in my eyes, and I choke that shit back because we need to rein this dude in and get hands on chest for CPR. There's not really any great way to manage internal bleeding as a sieve on a scene, so we do what we can. We pump her heart for an hour, longer, I don't know. At some point, I just blocked it out. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pushing hard and fast, at least 2 inches deep. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't really remember what happened, but I was on the line with him until paramedics arrived on scene. And then, just as suddenly, they were gone from my life. Families discovering suicides were all. Been working as a police call taker for 3 months. We take calls for multiple police jurisdictions. We cover a large area and a variety of communities. Couple of highlights from my short time here so far. Mother who found her son's suicide note in his bedroom. We go through the standard questions. Last known location, cell phone, description, method, mode of travel, previous history, etc. While I was waiting for members to arrive at her home, she told me about him and how he was supposed to go on a 7-day trip with the Coast Guard the next day. The phrase she said that sticks with me is, "My heart is in my boots." Not a popular saying where I'm from. Members arrive and so I disconnect so she can speak with them. 1 minute later, I see an update in the file. Already hung in the backyard. Body is cold. He was right outside the window the whole time we were talking. A girl I graduated high school with went missing over the weekend when I was on my block. I took a call from someone that had seen her right after she went missing and gave a description and direction of travel. They don't find her. The next day, we get a call of a body found hanging in the woods. It's her. Suicide. When I went on my lunch break, I made the mistake of looking at my Facebook wall and saw all the missing person posts and a heartbreaking interview with her dad describing how unusual her disappearance was. She was a sweet girl. I remember going to the fair or carnival with her and her friends when we were 14. As part of our training, we listened to some of the more intense calls. Worst one was of a woman whose boyfriend shot her in the mouth. The call starts with a baby screaming and howling in the background and some gurgling and groaning from the woman. She's only half conscious and barely managed to dial. She was able to tell the call taker her boyfriend shot her and which way he went. She also kept repeating, "I'm going to die. I'm dying." The gurgling, sobbing, and constant howling is something I'll never forget. Apparently she survived somehow though, so that's good. Woman in apartment, sobbing uncontrollably, saying she can hear her neighbor screaming, "My baby is dead." Caller, she says, has 2 to 3-year-old kids. Once police get there though, I see the update that the deceased was like 50 to 60 years old though, so not entirely sure what was going on there. We had like 4 to 5 callers for that one, so the file was a mess. I'm off my break-in for a few minutes here, finishing the last 5 hours of my night shift. Wish me luck. Happened to a friend of mine, but it's something I always think of and the thought just haunts me. We worked in the police emergency call center. She covered my shift as I wasn't feeling too good. She was working the day of the Christchurch mosque shooting. She said the phones were going off with people calling about the shootings. She spoke to a lady who was in the mosque. The lady was frantically screaming and she could hear the gun going off and all the screaming in the mosque. The lady stopped screaming, but she could still hear what was going on in the mosque. She still has PTSD from the event and took time off of work. We don't know who the lady was or where she is, but this call will always haunt us. It always scares me that they could have done more. I worked the UK equivalent, 999. My job was to route calls to fire, police, or ambulance. I had no medical training, and the calls that had me quit were as below. About 9 at night, a woman calls calmly asking for an ambulance as her husband had passed out. After 10 plus minutes of trying to get London Ambulance to answer the phone, she hangs up. I stay on the line and another 10 minutes later they answer. I relay the situation and address and they confirm they'll do a drive-by. Basically get the nearest available unit to visit the property, see what's happening. Half an hour later, the same woman calls back, exact same reason for calling. Once again I'm on hold for London Ambulance to answer for 10 plus minutes. Out of the blue, she comes onto the phone and calmly says, "Don't bother, he just died," and puts the phone down again. This time it doesn't disconnect, and I hear the most heart-wrenching wail of despair from the same woman. She then goes into a teary rant about how useless everything is and how London Ambulance killed her husband before the line cuts off again. Get through to the ambulance service, explain everything, and the operator confirms the drive-by got cancelled because the ambulance it was assigned to finished their shift. I didn't sleep that night and cried more tears than I ever had done previously. Next day I went into the office about an hour before my shift was set to start, emptied my locker, gave all my work stuff to my boss, and quit on the spot. Hubby of a former dispatcher. She worked nights by herself and I think hadn't even worked there a year. Knew the officers really well since obviously she was the only person there. Officer pulls a guy over for a routine stop, but for whatever reason he pulled a gun and shot the officer then took off. Officer calls it into dispatch, so she's calling EMTs and all that and gives the mile marker. From my misunderstanding, Other cops got on the scene first and were with him. EMT calls back for the location, and she somehow gave the wrong one, off by like a mile. She was pretty shaken by it, as it was someone she considered a friend. He lived. She found out later about the mix-up like a week later. It didn't seem to affect anything or delay him getting help, but it messed her up worse. Got put on leave and no one in the department could talk to her. Got PTSD from it and was in a bad place for a while. She's much better now and no longer a dispatcher. Disclaimer: I'm not the operator that took the call, but the one that had to make it on behalf of my next door neighbors. It was my first basic apartment after moving out, and had been there maybe 2 months when a young couple with a new baby moved in next door. They were struggling, didn't have a phone because they couldn't afford it. I wasn't great off financially either, but worked for an electronics retailer that sold Sprint after it had first come out, and so got it for almost nothing to promote them to customers, so I never bothered with the landline. They didn't have good coverage in the area at the time, so dropped calls were frequent at home. Bad enough that calling my mom once a week on Sunday involved me taking a walk to avoid that. One night, I get home late from work, make something to eat, start to relax and sit down in front of the TV when I get a knock at the door. I'd had a long day at work, it was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone, nor was I in a mood to talk to anyone, so ignored the first knock. There were other college kids that lived there, and I thought it was the drunken wrong door sort of thing. I hear a knock on another door, a second later, and I guess he got no answer there either, because a minute later, he's back at my door pounding even harder. What the fuck, man, it's late. I open the door, and he charges in a couple steps with this wild look in his eyes. I thought he was on something at first, so I go into defense mode. Can I use your phone, he asks. I only have a cell phone that doesn't really work that well around here. That's fine, I need to call 911. And then tears. My baby, I think he's dead. He almost shouted, dead. Oh shit. I grab my phone and dial, then hand it to him sort of dumbfounded. I had to take it back from him and relay to the operator. He was too distraught to get the address and details out, so I tried to stay calm and took the phone back. Yes, I'm the neighbor. This is the address. He just found his baby blue and not breathing in his crib, etc. All sort of detached. We were close to a fire station, so the operator gave me an ETA of just a few minutes, which I told him and motioned to him to head back over and stayed on until I could confirm emergency services arrived. I heard them wailing through the shared wall. Come on, breathe. I think they were trying CPR. The EMTs arrived and calmly started walking into my place with a stretcher. I kept the door open in case the guy needed something else, so I had to distract first responder traffic, then explain to them and a cop that showed up what I knew about the situation. I never saw my neighbors again after that. A day or so later was my day off, and I got a knock early that afternoon. An older woman greets me and says that she's the mom of my neighbor and asked if I was the guy that called 911. Said she wanted to thank me for making the call. I said it was no trouble, but I felt like a real asshole inside for not answering the first knock. Kept that last part to myself. I asked how he was doing, and she said he didn't make it. She was fighting tears. She just lost her baby grandson only a day and a half ago. Over the course of the day, his parents moved everything out. I guess it hurt too bad for my neighbor to go back in there. I didn't think to offer to help. I was too dumbfounded over the whole situation. It bothered me a lot not offering to help with the moving and ignoring the first knock, and I didn't sleep very well for a few nights until I talked to my boss about why I was dragging at work. He was a volunteer sheriff's deputy in a neighboring county in his off time from the store, so he'd seen this kind of thing before, and assured me that by the time my neighbor found his son, it was probably already too late, but still. This was in '99, but I still think about them every so often, if they managed to stay together after. 999 call taker, radio dispatcher from the UK here. One of my scariest calls came from a man who was on a train viaduct which was at least 200 feet high and was planning on jumping. He was 19 years old and had just lost his mother to cancer and had no other family to speak of. Now our control room had CCTV cameras from around the towns and cities that we covered, and I shouted across the room for someone to bring up the camera that covered the viaduct for me. Sure enough, around halfway along the viaduct and leaning precariously against the high rail was the guy I was talking to. I introduced myself and said that I could see where he was and that I hoped we could talk and get him to come down and get help. So, I'm talking to this lovely, quietly spoken man who is crying softly as he speaks to me, saying he has nothing left to live for. His mother had been the center of his whole life, especially so since she had contracted cancer and he'd cared for her alone. As I'm talking to him and trying to convince him to climb down, I hear a radio call in my earpiece and my supervisor frantically shouting that a train is coming along that line, and unless we get this man off the viaduct, he won't have to jump as the high-speed train is going to hit him. At this point, I'm literally shaking, pleading with the man to get to one of the small set of back areas on the viaduct used by the rail workers. He luckily agrees, and I tell him to stay on the call as he starts making his way as quick as he can to the nearest safe point. I can hear his labored, panic breathing through my earpiece, and suddenly, I hear the unmistakable sound of the train approaching, and the noise is so loud I can no longer hear the man I'm talking to, so all I can do is listen to the sound of the train racing past. Then it's silent. I hardly dare speak. I say the man's name. "Are you okay? Can you hear me?" Finally, in a shaky voice, he answers and says he is safe and just shaken up. He walks to the end of the viaduct where he's met by police officers and an ambulance and is taken off to hospital, and that's the last I speak to him. This call is as clear in my mind as the day I answered it. I can still remember the feeling of absolute terror as the train approached, and being terrified that was not he that quick enough, he was going to suffer a horrific death. Some things never leave your memories. I just pray he went on to live a happy, healthy life. What was a moment in your life that felt like a horror movie scene? I was exploring an abandoned mental asylum and then got the scare of my life when a scary-looking person inside one of the rooms was just staring at me without moving. Turns out some joker had left a cardboard cutout there. My mom is quite the sleep talker, but it's usually pretty short and incoherent when it happens. One night, as a teenager, I woke up to her scream yelling the Hail Mary prayer. My bedroom was across the house and upstairs. Difficult to get back to sleep after that one. Got T-boned by a fully loaded gravel truck in my Pontiac Grand Prix. Woke up several hours, 2 surgeries later, and 200 miles from my hometown. Had been lucid but not conscious for hours. Was in the middle of a sentence when I came to. Felt like time traveling and teleporting, and sometimes I get this uneasy feeling that I left behind a different world than I woke up in. Went into a real deep woods hike for only the second time in my life. My GPS broke and had to rely on my compass. Got turned around a few times because I couldn't remember the direction I came from, and it was getting dark. Lost the trailway. But the woods are weirdly silent in the dark and alone. It was around 2 a.m. by the time I found the trailhead. I was driving home on backcountry roads at midnight in heavy fog, like can't see 10 feet in front of you thick. Suddenly, I see an all-white silhouette running in front of the car. Every hair on my body stood up. I immediately think, oh god, oh fuck, it's a fucking woman in white, I'm gonna fucking die. Nope, just a drunken redneck who dove into the ditch. When I was about 12, my parents went out for dinner, leaving me home alone. We lived out in the country on a private road with only 3 other houses surrounded by cow fields and wooded areas. I went into the kitchen and glanced out the window toward the trees, and there in the fading light, I could see a person walking slowly through the woods. They were wearing all black, moving slowly, and appeared to pause behind trees. My heart started pounding so hard in my ears I couldn't hear anything else, and I was weak and shaky from fear. I froze and just watched them. Would they come to the house? Where were they going? This was before cell phones, but I suddenly remembered my mom had left the number of the restaurant by the living room phone. Slowly, I made my way toward the living room, trying to watch this stranger in the woods. Just as I entered the living room, all the lights in the entire house went out. By this time, it was nearly dark outside. I started openly sobbing, and in the dark, I heard a weird boom-like noise. That was it. I ran to my parents' room, hid under their bed, and sobbed. That's where my mom found me hours later, it felt like. Well, turns out the stranger in the woods was a stupid cow that had busted through a fence. The lights going out was from an accident a few miles away, hit the power line, and the boom was the pilot light in the gas stove. Man, I have never been that scared in my life though. 2 days after my now boyfriend told me he liked me, he fell from a zip line and broke his back, almost died. 6 months later, he got into a car wreck from a drunk driver, almost died. 6 months after that, he passed out and had to have emergency brain surgery, again, almost died. I now have severe anxiety, separation anxiety, and PTSD. That whole year was a fucking nightmare. I am a baby in a car seat, in between cousins in back seat. Dad is driving. This is in the 80s, and it is my aunt's insistence that I am in this seat even though I'm like 5. A sleeping semi-driver is coming over into our lane, and there's a cliff on the other side. Basically, my dad did some amazing driving, but semi blew us up. I'm uninjured, sitting in the seat, swinging my legs while everyone is unconscious. They all wake groaning. Dad doesn't wake up. Long story short, just minor scrapes, and Dad had broken leg. But the crunch of metal and those few seconds or minutes of being the only alive person was quite fear-inducing. Nothing serious like other Redditors, but I want to participate all the same. I have waking nightmares that constantly terrorize me. Whenever I'm walking upstairs, I constantly see flashes of me falling and hitting my open mouth on the stair's edge and all my teeth flying out like dice. Or when I see an infant's soft spot, I have a flash of plunging my index finger into its soft spot and stirring its brain. Or when I'm fishing, I imagine getting the hook stuck in my eye and on, and it's always frightening and causes panic attacks. I live in a state with a lot of canyons. I was going through one late at night and took the wrong exit. It turned into a one-lane road that was pitch black. It ended at a dead-end tunnel with one slightly swinging light. My phone was dead, and I was almost out of gas. I've never been more creeped out. It's also given me a complex where I can't let my gas get below a quarter full. Creepiness aside, it would have been a long walk back to civilization. I was freediving in about 20 to 25 feet of water. We were 9 miles from shore, down at Hen and Chicken's Reef outside Tavernier Key. We anchored about 100 feet from the reef. I was 16. I had an amazing, to me, underwater disposable camera, and I'd dive to the bottom, wait as long as I could for a good shot, take a pic or two, and go back up for air. Back then, I could hold my breath for about 3 to 4 minutes if I did everything perfect. Got a few pics of sea turtles, grouper, an awesome eel, bunch of stuff. So, one time I go down, find a fish that looked like Dory from Finding Nemo, and I was trying to time my camera click to one of her swimming pauses when she suddenly just bolts away into the reef. Guess I scared her. I thought for about 2 whole seconds. Everything had bolted from the reef. Even the eel I had gotten way too close to for a picture was hiding. Realizing this is the part in the movie where the shark rips the first person to shreds, I turn around nice and slow to discover that not 2 feet behind me was a 7-foot-long great barracuda with a body as big as one of my giant bicycling thighs. There were 4 more behind him, a bit further away, but he was just determined to see what I was doing at his reef. I stayed turned around and slowly bring the camera up and take picture after picture, desperately hoping that at least one of them come out as amazing as what I was seeing. They did not a single one. The whole time I'm taking pictures, he's drifting closer, not swimming really, just light tail flicks. Couldn't tell if he thought I was something else or if he thought I was going to feed him. I put the camera in my dive pouch, a little mesh bag that attaches to your belt. I used mine mostly for trash I found on the reef. I decided to see if he'd let me pet him. I almost did, got stupid close, but the way he looked at my hand told me it wasn't the best idea. I wish I had, then I'd either have a perfect ending to the story or at least a cool scar. It was awesome. I really want to go back one day. Haven't been back to the sea since then. It's been too long. My mother had a preemie, stillborn child. It was all very sudden, and she gave birth and hemorrhaged at home in the wee hours of the morning. Our home was in a very rural location, so we opted to drive her to the nearest hospital rather than wait for an ambulance. Its point of origin was the same hospital. Mom had lost enough blood that she lost consciousness if she sat up, so we drug her out of the house and to her vehicle on a blanket. This left a 15-inch wide smear of blood through the whole house. My 18-year-old brother drove away with her lying in the back of the van, semi-conscious, with the deceased infant in a shoebox next to her. 15 female called Dad at work, informed him about everything so he could meet them at the hospital. I stayed home with my younger siblings, who thankfully slept through the whole thing. I spent the rest of the night scrubbing blood out of the carpets. I finished just when they were waking up. It was before cell phones were common in our area, and no one called to tell me if Mom was alive or dead until late afternoon. She lived. When I was 9 to 11 years old, I had issues with sleep paralysis. I woke surrounded by 4 dark creatures, long wispy fingers clawing their way towards me, their silhouettes dancing like shadows cast by a bright flame. With my heart pounding and unable to breathe, I was forced to watch them inch closer and closer. At the last moment, before they touched my face, I was able to gasp desperately for air. The illusion broke and the phantasms shrunk back into the dark corners of the room. Headed home from a casino out in the country. Heard something ticking in my tire. Thought maybe I'd picked up a nail. Pulled on the next exit, which quickly ended onto a dirt road. Ended up in front of an abandoned schoolhouse, and what's more, there was a deep harvest moon up, giving these eerie feelings everywhere. I was already uneasy when I'd gotten out to check the wheel, and then I heard something heavy moving around the building. Instincts kicked in, screaming, "Fuck no, I've seen this movie." I jumped in my car and punched it backwards onto the road. I'd have driven on my rims if I had to be anywhere but there. Fortunately, it was just a pebble in my treads, but I wasn't about to chance it with whatever was out there. Was at my cabin, which is a half a mile from any neighbors on the lake. Had been splitting wood in the afternoon and left the axe and the stump. Flash forward to the evening. Lightning storm on the horizon, no rain, totally silent but tons of lightning. So wife and I are sitting in the dark watching it because it's cool. She turns to me and says she's getting a little freaked out. I was too, so we turn on the lights. They're on maybe 5 seconds and power goes out. We get really freaked out. I quickly go lock all the doors. We start getting ready for bed. Calm down. Go into the bedroom, which looks out over the woodpile. Lightning strike, and framed in the window is the axe in the stump. Spent the next however long watching every lightning flash to make sure the axe was still there. Every time just freaking ourselves out that it would be gone like a movie. I worked at a place that used to be a mental hospital before it was converted into offices. I was working late one night until I was the only person there, and all the lights were off in the hallways. I walked all the way to my car, and when I got there, I realized I'd forgotten my keys. On the way back to my office, I kept thinking to myself, young woman walking back into the old, dark, former mental hospital because she forgot her keys. This is definitely how horror movies start. That place was creepy in the daylight. At night, it was a whole different feeling. Doing my job in a neighborhood but no one around, suddenly I hear this crazed screaming, high-pitched, breathless shrieking. It just went on, and it was the kind of screaming that you had to go fix right now because it had to stop. The woman had just found her husband dead from a suicide. 25 years ago, my ex-husband and I were traveling from Nevada to West Virginia via car. In Arkansas, we drove through a little town called Brinkby. It was late spring, warm, and still light outside. We were hungry and tired and decided to get some dinner and stop for the night. Brinkby initially seemed like a charming little town. We went through the local Mickey D's, and that's when things started getting weird for us. While we were ordering, we heard what sounded like a gunshot, followed by a woman screaming. I know we heard it because we both looked at each other and said, "What the fuck?" at the same time. Then, we looked at the 50-ish woman taking our order. She didn't bat an eye and had absolutely no expression on her face. When my husband asked her if she'd heard that, the only thing she said was, "Will there be anything else?" No thank you." After we paid for our food, we drove down this nice tree-lined main street. Not really well off, but definitely well kept. No fancy cars, but no rust buckets, and no people. At that time of year, kids should have been out playing, riding bikes, etc. People should have been walking that lovely street. Nothing. No animals, no birds, no other cars on the road, no sounds, just nothing, except a strong feeling of being watched. We grew more and more uneasy. Finally, we found an old motel vacancy sign light up, lights on inside, no cars in the parking lot, still no one to be seen, no movement inside. My ex and I sat in the car for a minute, just looking at this place. At the exact same time, we turned to each other and said, "Hell no." I was certain that if we stayed the night there, we'd be staying there permanently. There was just this palpable feeling of evil and fear that I'd never experienced before, nor have I felt since. I'm not one to always be tuned into the atmosphere around me. I kind of live in my own little bubble, so this was really intense for me. As we drove away, we both felt the dread physically lift from the car. If it had just been me, I would have chalked it up to silliness, but my ex was in the military and honestly, not much rattled him, especially very intangible things like this. We simply knew we were in danger. He told me later that it felt like we were doing the characters in a horror movie who made it out alive, but bloodied, limping down the road, holding each other up for support. Despite being exhausted, we purposefully drove another 2 hours before stopping for the night, just to be as far away from that place as we could. Fuck Brinkby, Arkansas. When I was 16, I did 1-year high school exchange program to Japan. When I arrived, it turned out my host family was in a Christian sect. They informed me that they had decided to host me because I came from a Christian country. I come from a progressive European country, which is certainly not very religious. They used me as their housekeeper. I had to get up at 5 a.m. to do laundry, etc. My host mom was decidedly not well mentally. Once, she screamed at me for an hour for putting a towel too close to the toilet, in the cupboard for towels, mind you. She also hit her 6-year-old daughter and berated her for not being good enough in school. The kid was dyslexic. The stay became more and more terrifying. My host mom kicked her daughter out of her own bedroom for me to stay in because I was smarter than this 6-year-old. My clothes were taken away and I was forced to wear Christian clothes, preppy skirts, light colors, no pants allowed. I was not allowed to brush my hair within view of anyone because the act was dirty. My host mom was a friend of my contract in the exchange program, and my calls were under surveillance from my host mom, so I couldn't reach out to anyone, and when I did, I was told I was lying. Since my host sister was being abused, she was not doing well. I tried to be kind to this girl, and she felt very safe around me. I think, one day, I had taken her home from school. Host mom was still at work. The little girl just lost it for some reason, started screaming, crying, and hitting me. It was intense. I was 16 and had no idea what to do. She was acting like an injured animal. After a while of this, I went into the bedroom and closed the door because she was being so aggressive toward me. I hear a commotion in the kitchen and get worried she hasn't calmed down, but rather was trying to put on the gas stove or something dangerous that could hurt her. I open the door and look out down the hallway. What I see is straight out from a horror movie. This little Japanese girl is running towards me in her Catholic schoolgirl uniform, holding a huge knife and screaming at the top of her lungs. I bolt, shoeless, out of the apartment. Sakura is running after me with the knife. The elevator doors barely manage to close as she is stabbing the doors with the knife. Most of all, I remember her eyes. They were completely wide, black and blank. It was like she was in a different world. I spent several hours sitting in the lobby crying until my host mom got home. What happened afterwards was completely surreal. I refused to go back into the apartment after hours of arguing. The contact person in the exchange organization is finally called, and I demand to be put somewhere else right now. The lady finally complies, and I get convinced to go back into the apartment to wait for her to pick me up. My host mom hits and screams at her daughter. Then she instructs me to sit on a kitchen chair in the middle of the living room. I'm not allowed to move, and the host mom gets down on the floor and rolls around, screaming and crying for me and God to forgive her. This went on for hours. She was completely psychotic, and I was scared out of my fucking mind. I got picked up and placed in a different host home. The 3 months I lived with this Christian family was never spoken of again. People who have done a multi-day hiking trip, such as the Appalachian Trail, what is your horror story from the trip? I was backpacking in the Sierras with a couple of friends, and we were crammed into a small tent. For most of the trip, we were in backcountry, but had come down to a more established campground to check out some waterfalls. The campground had attracted a sow bear with her 2 cubs, so we used our bear cans and left all the zippers open on our packs so she could dig through them without damaging them. Sometime in the middle of the night, we wake up to snuffling around our camp. We sit up in the tent, shoulder to shoulder, listening. There's so many of us in the tent that my shoulder is touching the side of the fabric and something bumps into me through the tent wall. A bear, with cubs, bumped into me. We held our breath until she snuffled farther away, then banged the pots we'd brought into the tent until we were pretty sure she was scared off. Sorry, this is a long one, but it was a wild night. I was doing a one-night backpacking trip with a friend a few years back in some woods we didn't know very well. It was a very popular area for such things and not particularly remote, so we weren't worried. The sunset snuck up on us a bit, so we were making camp in the dark. I was gathering some firewood by the light of my headlamp when I spot the unmistakable shimmer of a pair of eyes maybe 100 feet from me. My dumbass is excited because cool, wildlife. After staring at these eyes for a minute though, it becomes clear this is not a harmless raccoon. It is something big. I don't have any sort of weapon, and I don't know how best to scare away my mystery animal. I call out to my buddy, who shines his brighter light in that direction. Turns out our visitor is a mountain lion. Maybe the fear distorted things, but man, that thing looked big. I didn't know much about them, but I knew that if they attack you, they are spectacularly deadly. We decide to try and make a fire as quickly as possible, since we figure we can't outrun the murder kitty. As we walked backward toward our campsite, the damn thing kept perfect pace with us and never broke its gaze. The more of it I could see, the more I wished I couldn't. That cat was absolutely pure muscle. Shit was terrifying. Luckily, we had supplies to get the fire going very quickly, which had the effect we hoped. Our stalker stopped slowly advancing on us. It appeared to think for a minute about its next move and then decided to maintain its current distance, but circle us for a while. So now it's a stalemate. Despite not being very remote, this area didn't have cell service back then, so we had no choice but to play the waiting game. We pitched our tent, made dinner, and tried to make jokes about the situation for the next few hours. The cat circled us for a long time, maintaining his perimeter. At some point, though, he stepped behind a tree, and we never saw him come out the other side. My friend and I had opposing reactions to this. I took the glass half full route and was relieved that it was gone. My friend's view was, well, now he can be anywhere, you idiot. It's not like we'll hear him coming if he charges us from behind. He was probably more right than me. Eventually, we're too tired to stay awake and aren't willing to risk burning the forest down, so we let the fire burn out. No sign of our stalker for a while, so we're hoping to sleep without being eaten alive. Luckily, we did just that, and I woke up the next morning well-rested and enjoying the act of breathing. As soon as I sat up in the tent and saw my friend, though, it was obvious something was up. He was wide-eyed and looked pretty freaked out. It turns out, just as the morning light showed up in the sky, our feline friend came back to check on us. Apparently, there was a funny yowly sound that woke my friend up and got closer to the tent over the course of 10 minutes or so. I didn't know at the time that mountain lions make a sound similar to a scream, which is very disconcerting when you're camping by yourselves. Not that I cared though, my survival instincts were going strong as I happily slumbered. My friend hoped it was a bird at first, but pretty much knew what it was. He didn't want to risk making any noise by waking me or getting out of his sleeping bag, so he just laid still hoping it would pass by. Apparently, that harbinger of death got right the hell up on our tent and paused trying to figure out what it was. The windows were zipped shut, but my friend said it got close enough and there was enough light that he could see its shadow on the tent wall. It made another screech or two, sniffed around, and decided to move on. So anyway, I wake up not knowing any of this, but just seeing my friend doesn't look good. I asked him what was up, and he says let's get out of the tent and he'll fill me in. I wonder now if that was because he didn't want to be the first one out of the tent. Maybe I had made too many jokes about how I could run faster than him, so he would likely be the tasty treat. Luckily, the hike out was uneventful, and this whole event was nothing more than education for us. We always carry a gun while camping now, though we've never seen anything else even close to that scary. Read up on your local predators ahead of time, kids, and definitely bring one really slow runner on every trip. TLDR, went backpacking and got stalked by a mountain lion. We didn't die though. Hiking in the Smoky Mountains, there were 5 of us, 17 to 18 years old. We rolled into Gatlinburg and stopped at a gas station. This old toothless guy leaning up against the wall, so stereotypical he could have been a character actor, said, "I wouldn't head up there, there's a storm a-brewing." And 18-year-old me, like a complete dipshit, replied, "Oh, it's okay, we've got rain parkas." We mapped our hike, not quite realizing the first leg was up a freaking mountain, and parts of it were like climbing a ladder. Freezing rain started about 2 hours in, then it turned to snow flurries. By the time we got to a campsite, we were seriously freezing. My hands were so cold and shaky, I could not untie my hiking boots and wound up cutting off the laces. I couldn't open my pocket knife and wound up using a portable tree saw we brought. It was freezing rain, then snow most of the night, and we sealed the tent up so much that frost formed on the inside from our breathing. In the morning, there were 4 inches of snow on the ground, and I'd left my boots by the fire stupidly thinking they would somehow be dry or something. They were curled up frozen on the rocks. We understood we had and were experiencing hypothermia and decided to head back. The choice was 3 miles ahead or 5 miles back, so we decided to go forward. Even with the snow on the ground, the path was easy to follow. However, we had to cross a bridge and we discovered that the bridge was washed away. So, we had 2 miles to go, or 7 miles back. The bridge was washed away and there were 3 to 4 inches of snow on the ground. We knew we'd have to wade across a swollen river with what turned out to be some fast-moving water. Picture in your mind 5 teenagers taking off their boots and pants, shoving the pants into the straps of our backpacks, and willingly wading through 4 feet of 33-degree water. Every one of us slipped on rocks and went in. The pain of the cold was indescribable, especially when the water hit my scrotum. This was the first life lesson in having to endure something you have zero control over. Anyway, the last person across was my best friend, and it was his car we drove down there. Like the rest of us, he slipped and fell into the river, but when he stood back up, he realized the river had yanked his pants out of the strap of his backpack. In his pants pocket were the car keys, his wallet, and $200 to get us home. So, 5 dumbass kids are now screaming in alarm as we run around in our bare feet and underwear with 4 inches of snow on the ground, trying to follow the riverbank down, hoping we see our friend's pants washed up somewhere. Crazy. Of course, we never found the pants and hobbled back down the mountain and hitched a ride with the local back into town. We were so miserable looking that a hotel lady took pity on us and gave us a room with the only promise that our parents would wire money and FedEx a spare set of keys. This was in the mid-'80s and before Gatlinburg became a tourist trap place. At night, during the freezing rain, we all heard loud cracks and stuff falling. We thought the wind was taking out branches of trees, and I seriously thought I might fall asleep and be crushed to death by a falling branch. But in the morning, looking at the trees, we realized the driving rain had frozen to the trees, and that the wind bending the trees had made the ice crack and fall. None of us had ever camped in the winter, and we were totally and naively unprepared. How none of us died of hypothermia, I don't know. God loves stupid kids, I guess. I hiked and stayed in Zaleski State Forest in southern Ohio probably 10 years ago. I was camping with my dad, my uncle, and both cousins. Each of us had our own one-person tent and slept alone and spaced roughly 20 to 30 feet from each other. This part of Ohio is extremely rural, and at the time, Google Maps did not have this area mapped out, so we had to follow an actual map to get to the trailhead. Also, there was no cell service. We had heard rumors about a nearby abandoned tunnel and that it was haunted, and ended up staying in the general area the first night. Around 3 a.m., we were all woken by this incredibly loud bang. It sounded like a car drove off a cliff. However, we were nowhere near any roads and had hiked several miles away from the trailhead. Nothing else happened that night, but we just couldn't understand where a sound that loud could have come from. It definitely wasn't a tree falling. It sounded almost like an explosion of metal. I've also section hiked parts of the Appalachian Trail, but have yet to experience anything spooky. I was carrying too much weight. I slipped in some mud and pulled a groin muscle. My wife was freaking out and didn't know what to do, and the mosquitoes were insane, making decision-making difficult. So we ditched our packs under some trees, tried to figure out where on the trail we were, hobbled 4 miles back to the car, and tried to come up with a plan. It turned out there was a county road about 1/8 of a mile from where we ditched the packs. Probably could have just flagged someone down. Jatbula Trail, NT, Australia. I headed out solo on this week. On my 5th day, I was walking along and had noticed a lot of very fresh buffalo scat and hoof prints in the sandy track that morning. There's a sizable feral water buffalo population in northern parts of Australia. The trees were thinning out into a large plain. I was walking along in my own little world until I caught something out of the corner of my eye. About 50 meters away from me, I could see a water buffalo. Then I saw another and another. I think there was about a dozen of them. I froze with fear and retreated back behind a skinny little tree thinking, fuck, now what? I knew there was a couple of hikers who had left camp after me, so I thought I'd just wait for them no matter how far behind they were. Then the herd of buffalo began to stampede. It was deafening. I wish I could describe the cacophony of all those feet hitting the ground. They moved fast, running perpendicular to the trail toward the river. In that moment, I didn't know if they were running because they had seen or heard me, if I had spooked or upset them. I stayed so still while they disappeared down to the river. I stood there still waiting for the other hikers to catch up to me. It was quite a few minutes until the stampede began again, these huge beasts running full speed in front of me and out into the plain. The other hikers were only about 5 minutes behind me. They hadn't heard the noise of the stampede. I caught up to another couple at the next waterhole who told me they thought they'd heard a very loud plane or something flying past. I shook my head and said, nope, buffalo feet. I was glad not to say any more buffalo for the rest of the week. It's weird to think if I had walked even 20 seconds quicker, I'd have been cleaned up by a buffalo stampede. Done for. Makes a good story to tell, but I never want to see another buffalo while on foot ever again. One night, we didn't make our goal and were absolutely gassed from a long day of hiking. We set up camp at a small clearing that was just off the trail. Everything was normal and the 7 of us went to our various shelters. After laying there for a bit, there was the sound of a plane, and with every second it just kept getting louder and louder until the sound was almost ear-piercingly loud. All of a sudden, the tent went from pitch black to completely lit. My friend Eric was grabbing my chest through my sleeping bag and very clearly screaming, "Fuck!" while I just curled further and further into the fetal position because I was sure a plane was about to come smashing into the ground. It went past as quickly as it came. The only thing we could guess was that it was an army drill and the plane was flying as low as possible to get through the mountain pass. Not really a horror story, but on the Appalachian. We also drank water that had a huge dead salamander in it. So, if you see a well for spring the water with a hatch, don't take water from the PVC tube and trust it right away. That was on Springfield in the Georgia section. Took a trek to Everest Base Camp, started at Jiri, went to camp, flew back from Lukla. It is an 8-hour drive from Kathmandu to Jiri. Started to drive by getting sick on the plane trip to Nepal, sore throat, coughing, etc. Drive was me, porter, guide, and driver. Horrible pollution in Kathmandu, nasty stuff. After about 1 hour, things clear up, we're out of the city. Seeing temples, clean, fresh, cool, crisp air, fabulous. We feel a bang in the car. Get out. A kid on a motorcycle wearing a suit with his girlfriend in tow has rear-ended us. A lot of negotiating, then money changes hands. Cool, back on our way. No, the guide says, we're taking a detour to get the car fixed. Ended up in a village in the middle of nowhere with a mechanic using a sledgehammer to fix the bumper. Feeling worse. Get lost for 20 minutes before getting back on the road. Stop for lunch. Don't want to eat since throat is on fire, but I know I have to. I'm starting a hard hike tomorrow. Force myself to eat dal bhat. Ask to use restroom. Lady point to ladder in back of room. Climb down ladder to an open area under the restaurant facing the valley. It's a pigsty, a literal pigsty where they keep the pigs. Peed in a pigsty. We got back on our way. Hours later, the roads are getting progressively worse. No pavement, only potholes. We pull over. We have a flat. They change the flat. Back on our way. A while later, we crest a hill and a gaggle of kids appear out of nowhere. They drag a barricade across the road and block traffic. About 30 kids, teenagers, and preteens. A hell of a lot of shouting ensues. The bus also gets stopped. More cars get stopped. Everyone is shouting. Driver hands over money, still shouting. Driver hands over more money. They let the bus pass. Driver still shouting. Kid gives driver a scrap of paper. They let us pass. Found out later this was a receipt so we wouldn't get extorted again by their gang friends. Kinda cool. Finally get to Jiri. Get into tea house. Tell guide that I'm feeling really bad. Going to take a nap before dinner. Wake up later. Guide is nowhere to be found. Find porter who knows no English. Manages to tell me guide went to hospital. I feel guilty thinking that I got the guy sick. Made friends with tea house owner who speaks English very well. Menu in English. As I read the menu, guide appears. Without preamble, hands me a sheet of paper. The thing is written in the most beautiful cursive handwriting I've ever seen. Flowing letters, graceful curves, and is in perfect English. It is a written diagnosis from the doctor. The guide is 18 years old, lives in Kathmandu, has had pain in his side for several days. Blood test shows acute appendicitis. Guide says he's okay. He will continue on trip with me. He pulls out a mass of individually vacuum-packed pills the doctor gave him. See, I'm okay. I have medicine. I don't want to ruin your hike. You're going to die. That will definitely ruin my hike. You cannot go on. Guide refuses to abandon hike and get surgery. Call over my new friend, the tea house owner, explain the situation. Takes 45 minutes of arguing to convince him that he is in grave danger. He has to make some phone calls to get money from his friends. He has no insurance. Had to get an ambulance to take him back to Kathmandu to get surgery. Guide tells me tour operator will get me another guide in a few days. Until then, it's me and the porter. Guide leaves. Next morning, ready to hike. Porter knows very little English. Where do we go? Porter shrugs. Never done this hike before, no idea. I facepalm. Talk to my friend, the tea house owner. He points to a super steep trail going up a mountain. Go there, stay on trail. He leaves. And that's how I started my hike to Everest Base Camp. Kepler Track, New Zealand. Did a miscalculation on the number of calories 2 adults needed for the 4-day trek. Had nothing but one jerky stick left and minimal water when we barely caught the last shuttle from the end trailhead back to Tianau, an additional 14 kilometers away. Whenever I think of the hungriest I've ever been, it's the last half day of that trek. When we got back to our rented room, We ordered 2 pizzas and a dessert made of berries, ice cream, and chocolate. I cannot remember what the pizza tasted like or even what we ordered. I only noticed the food going into my mouth at dessert. It was the most beautiful flavor I've ever experienced. Holy shit, it's my fucking day to shine. I used to go backpacking every summer. The last trip I took was a 10-day trip on the John Muir Trail in California. Literally, the first day we were at the highest point in our trip when a lightning storm rolled in. We had to throw our packs and hide, crouching under some bushes for an hour while the storm passed over us. Have you ever been so close to lightning that the thunder happens at literally the same time? It was so cloudy, I couldn't hear myself scream. I honestly thought I would die. I was also 16. Eventually the storm passed, but for the rest of the trip we were jumpy every time a camera flash went off even. I'm still not stoked about lightning storms. It's been 14 years, but they don't terrify me anymore at least.